I was like really, really, really struggling with mental health. I was working like 90 plus hours, working all the time, and I was so stressed. And I can remember I would like get to my office in the morning and I would sit at my desk and I would just start crying every day. And I would just start crying. And then I would kind of like shake it off and be like, okay, no, there's no time to cry, basically. If you don't have the discipline to get up at 5 in the morning and work for a few hours before your job and work late nights and spend your weekend working, I don't think you have any business being an entrepreneur. Like, period. Just, if you can't do that, just find a different career. Because if you can't do that now, when you're working, like I still work 80 hours a week right now because we're going through this like crazy growth period. And if you aren't committed to doing that, entrepreneurship is definitely not for everybody. And I don't even know if I would always recommend it for people because it's a really lonely, hard route with a lot of reward, but also a lot of challenges.
We got sound speed, as we like to say. And yeah, here we are. So sound speed is just it's just a term, and you're like, okay, camera's rolling, sound speed. All right.
I have not heard that one.
We're going. So yeah. But anyways, so Taylor, welcome in. Thanks so much for joining us. And I'm excited for today's conversation.
Excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we have Taylor Ivey on the pod. And Taylor, you are amazing to me because you have 3 businesses. That's unbelievable. You have 5 businesses. Holy cow. Okay, guys, you're in for even a better treat today. You have 5 businesses. That's amazing. I have my one business with a side hustle, and I've done some entrepreneurial different ventures, but man, you have 5 businesses. That's incredible. I can't wait to dive into that. So
it's a lot. I don't know if I'd recommend it.
Yeah. But that's incredible. I mean, seriously, like, kudos to you. And I'm like really excited to learn more about them. So, yeah. So for today's conversation, I thought that we could, the arc of the conversation is really 3 parts. The first part is what I like to call like 0 to hero. When I, tell us how like you got to where you are today and, take us through your backstory. Second part is let's talk about where you are today with your 5 businesses, which is wild. And then, the third part is let's talk about where you go in the future. What excites you, what you're looking at, the risks you're looking to take, but also sprinkling in there, obviously this podcast is called Taking Risks. So I want to talk a little bit about the risk you've taken, the kind of how you mitigate risk a bit. Obviously, I'm an insurance guy, so we're going to talk a little bit about insurance. I'm sure 5 different businesses. I'm sure, and I know
a lot of insurance policies.
I'm sure a lot of different insurance policies. It's we don't need to get too in depth with those, but just like how you're thinking about it. The whole purpose of this podcast is to really, maybe someone who is a woman entrepreneur or any entrepreneur who's like, oh my God, Taylor has 5 businesses, like just to dive into the thinking, how you've gotten to where you are. And then how you're managing where you're at right now and then where you're going. So
I love that.
How's that sound?
That sounds great. I think risk is, you can't really start anything without risk. So it's a great topic. And I feel like people, need to learn about it because it's something that you can get over. And I think sometimes there's a fear around that, but I think a lot of reward when you take a risk.
Absolutely. No risk, no reward.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, I think for the first part, just kind of give us your backstory a bit, where you're from, how you got into entrepreneurial, ventures and, kind of, what has kind of led you to where you are today.
Okay. Yeah. I'm, from the East Coast. I'm from Connecticut. Grew up in Connecticut, kind of between Connecticut and Florida. My parents are divorced, so would go back and forth. And I just I had an interesting childhood with my parents being divorced because I had 2 very different experiences. I had my dad, who was a serial entrepreneur, not necessarily finding a lot of success in entrepreneurship, but certainly a dreamer and continually trying, which was one experience. And then I had my stepdad and my mom, who were very hardworking. That was like the biggest thing growing up. It was basically like there's no obstacle. Like can't's not a word. That was like a huge thing growing up in my house. Can't's not a word. Anything is possible. Like, any obstacle can be overcome. If you can't go, over it, you go around, you go through it, you can, there's no limitations. And then I had my dad that was more dreamer, more, like I said, entrepreneurial, and a little less about the like work part of it, more about the like end goal, which at the end of the day might be why some of the the entrepreneurial didn't work out so well.
A lot of it's about the journey.
It is.
Not about the end destination.
Yeah, some
right?
people are very this like, I think especially right now with social media and all that, there's this idea of like get rich quick, that you don't put in like nobody's really recording the like 12 years it took to get there, all of the time and energy that you put in and all the hard work. And so I was kind of able, I think, to see both sides of that, and then kind of blend them together. So from a young age, I have an older brother, we're 22 months apart. I feel like it was just, watching our dad be an entrepreneur, like, a lot of people, their parents are their heroes. We wanted to be just like him. And we would just like talk. I mean, we'd be like 7 years old. We were coming up with businesses. It was just always something that was like part of, I feel like, an identity that we created for ourselves that I think, potentially a little like forced on us from a parent. And that's like a whole nother conversation of,
Sure.
about the things that get passed to you from parents. But so basically I kind of grew up that way, went to college. I knew that I definitely wanted to be some sort of an entrepreneur. I was I spent most of my life wanting to work in film, wanted to be a screenwriter. That's what I studied in college, was determined to be a screenwriter. And then when I graduated college, I started working in film. I moved to New York like kind of right away, and I started working in film, and that just seemed like a really tough gig. And so on the flip side of that, I had always had, was always really crafty, like really artsy. It's funny now, I feel like I'm much more operational and like almost like type A, where I didn't start out that way. I was like uber creative as a kid. Obviously like wanted to be like a writer and all these things. And so I had also wanted to have a clothing company. That was kind of like in college, kind of both going back and forth, which came out of the passion for, I put myself through college, wasn't necessarily supported by my parents. And I was around a lot of friends that were in different situations, and a lot of like clothing that I couldn't afford. And so that kind of was where that dream came from wanting to, I started kind of making my own clothes in college. Or attempting to. Honestly, they were like horrible, but I really tried. They weren't great. But anyway, when I moved to New York, I spent like 6 months working in film and was like, wow, this is going to be really, really challenging. So I was 21 years old. I was like, well, let's try this other dream. Like, what do I have to lose? And that's kind of like, I started to shift my focus to starting this clothing company. And it's kind of like a weird story because, like, when I think back on it, like, I moved to New York. I had $114 in my bank account. I had one maxed out credit card that I couldn't use anymore. Like, I had put myself through college. So I didn't have any family money. So I had literally $114, and I had no job. And
so where were you living?
So I have an uncle. Everyone has like an uncle. He's not really like a family friend. David.
Uncle Stewie.
Yes, Uncle Stewie. David Beatty, who I owe a lot of my success to him because he's a serial entrepreneur, now an angel investor. And for my graduation present, he let me live with him it was like 6 months. I think he kicked me out after 9 months because, I couldn't like afford anything. So he let me live in this like bedroom that he had on the Upper West Side. And yeah, so anyway, deciding to start my own clothing company when I was 22, I literally had no money. So it's just like, when I think back on it, I feel like, talking about like taking risk, I felt like at the time it was like a little bit of being naive. And I also had like nothing to lose. I had no money anyway. So it's like, I was so young. I was like, what's the worst that could happen?
Totally.
Anyway, so I ended up switching careers, working in fashion. That was like kind of the first step. And I started working in fashion PR as an assistant to their CEO at the company. And I I caught a lucky break because I couldn't afford. I was super poor. I think I was making I feel like I was making maybe $37,000 a year. I had $1,200 a month in payments for my student loans that kicked in after 6 months. So I was just I was working second jobs. I was trying to do anything I can to survive, basically. And I caught a really lucky break because my boss at the time, she had a townhouse in Chelsea, which is a neighborhood in New York, and she had just bought it, and it had multiple apartments in it, and she was going to turn it into one big townhouse. And in order to do that, she had to go through permitting, and it just took a really long time. So she came to me and was like, "Hey, do you want a side job?" I've heard, this sounds crazy now when I say it, but this is, I'm 35, so this is 2011 that this was happening. She was like, "I've heard," she was European. She's like, "I've heard about this thing." She's like, "It's called Airbnb." I was like, "Ooh, what's this?" She's like, "It's really big in Europe." And so she asked me as a side job if I could furnish all the apartments and rent them on Airbnb. And she would give me 10% of it was a commission. And so I did that for a year. And it was, she didn't do anything. I made her, honestly, I got really good at it. She made her a ton of money. And that money that I made on the side, I paid off my credit card bill. I needed a little bit more because I really couldn't afford to live on my paycheck. But I ended up with $5,000 that I had extra. By the time she ended up shutting down the Airbnb because she started her construction. So I ended up with $5,000. And that was the money that I took to start the business.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
from $5,000 to 5 businesses.
Yeah,
That's the headline right there.
Right? I mean, you definitely, there's different ways to go about business, and you can go the route of raising money. You can go the route of maybe you have some money, or you can go the extremely bootstrapped way, which I don't think there's really a wrong way to go about it. I think at the time in my life, I was 22 when I launched my first business when I was 23, but I was 22 at the time. And who's going to give me money at that time? I had no credibility. So there was no choice other than to bootstrap it.
Well, I think when you're young too, I've talked about this on our last podcast, but when you're young, you're 22, you have time. Like you said, you kind of have nothing to lose.
Yeah, you can make it up.
You have time to make it up, right? And I've said this on other podcasts, but you're not going to take that same risk at 60 years old.
No.
So it is important, I think, when you're young, your risk level should be a lot higher, and you should be going for things that really, taking a chance and taking a leap or taking a risk and being like, I'm going to go for it, right? Because, hey, if I mess up and I've spent a couple of years on this, then I'm only 25 and I can get another job and I'll be fine.
I couldn't agree more. I see it a lot, for 12 years, I've had these businesses, and one of my businesses I own some retail stores. And so with those, I end up with a lot of younger staff. And I'm not as involved with the sales staff as I used to be, but for the first X amount of years, I was super, super involved in managing them. And I see it a lot of people are really averse to risk. And I think that society is teaching us to be safe. And I don't agree with that. And I to your point, I don't know if I would have taken the same risks now that I took when I was 22, because I do have more to lose. I want to start a family. There's more to lose. And I mean, maybe I would have, but I find that the people that end up pushing off their dreams, they push them off indefinitely.
Yeah.
Or if they feel the people that say, "Oh, I'm just going to wait till when I have this much." It's that saying "Oh, I'll do it when," or when I make that money, then I'll buy that, then I'll take the trip. And that's just a horrible way, unfortunately, to look at life, because you're just going to keep pushing it off. And I think just living in the present, if you can, and is the best way to go about it.
It's a powerful message.
Yeah.
I hope everybody listening intakes that. I digested that hard and tries to live by that. I think that's an amazing thing. You only got one shot at life.
You really do. I think about that a lot. I feel like we're sort of digressing from the story, but I think about that so much with, I think it's interesting as we age, we look at our parents. And just that age group. And And I feel I'm constantly thinking about how I have one life. I'm constantly thinking that if I don't do this now, I'll never get another chance. If I don't, go on that adventure, I might not be able to do it. If I don't take that risk, I may never get the reward of that or the lesson that, if they like taking risks, it's not about always reward. It's also about the lesson and the process, because that's where, I certainly have made so many mistakes in the 12 years that I've been an entrepreneur. And I wouldn't even, I'm learning, when we talk about kind of the phase we're in, I'm in a really interesting phase of my career where I am humbly realizing that I am really not equipped for this next phase. And that's just like a very, you may not learn that unless you start taking risks like that.
Absolutely. Another thing I love to say, one of my core kind of things I go back to, maybe call it affirmation or value or whatever. It's like, you never lose. You win or you learn. Mm-hmm. And I've said that again on this podcast before, but you win or you learn. And it's, I love that message because you never really take losses. You're just learning along the way. Like you said, it's sometimes taking that risk is just about the learning lesson and seeing what happens. And a lot of good, I think, comes out of that.
So much good. And I do think that it's something, too, that takes a little bit of self-awareness, because I think a lot of people are programmed or have the default to think that failure is this awful thing. And they don't necessarily look at a difficult experience as a growth potential. I don't. It's just been my experience, which I look at it all like that. If I didn't go through that, then I wouldn't have gotten here, that I wouldn't have learned that lesson. But I feel like the more hopefully people hear that message, they can get out of that mentality of whether that's a victim mentality or, that's happening to you, not for you. I think everything happens for you. I think life gives you, or the universe, whatever you want to say, it gives you what you need in order to grow. And it typically, I think, gives you it when you're able to handle it, even though at the time you think that you can't. If it's something really difficult, I do feel like everything kind of happens for you so that you can continue on this path of whether that's self-growth, self-awareness, self-love, whatever that is. I think you're sprinkled constantly with little lessons, and you just have to kind of take a moment to either appreciate them or be aware of them. Otherwise, they kind of pass you by.
Absolutely. No, I could not agree more. I was thinking about how, my son, we were just talking about offline, but yeah, he came into my life. I think it was the perfect time of okay, we need this to grow and level up and take the next step in life. A lot of things, they, like you said, they happen at the right time to you and help you grow. So you're in New York.
I guess.
To get back to
Congrats.
I love it. I love getting into the philosophical, because this is what it's about as well, is diving into your mentality, right? And I want entrepreneurs and listeners to hear that. I think that's so important, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I'm excited to keep diving into it. But so you're in New York, you have $5,000. Back to the story. Because I'm really intrigued, too. Yeah. Because, again, $5,000 for 5 businesses. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I only had one at the time. So I had decided to start a clothing company, and it took me a minute to figure out what I was actually going to make. And I settled on, I don't know if you know this, because I obviously own a sweater business now, but I started by making women's capes.
Women's capes?
It sounds strange, but they were beautiful. Yes, they're more like jackets. And so I decided on
making collars and things?
Yeah, they had collars. I made all sorts of ones. They were kind of equestrian looking, very heritage, very old Ralph Lauren looking. Cool. So I had decided to make these because I had found this vintage cape in my mom's closet that I was kind of obsessed with. And it ended, our capes were much nicer than the one that I had found, but it gave me kind of an inspiration because they were a piece that I think when you're starting a business, if I were to start a clothing or a fashion brand again, I would never start a clothing brand. I would start an accessories line because fit is really difficult. Fit ends up being something, fit and seasonality are really difficult, where like accessories, like you can sell the same thing all year round. They're very easy to pack. I mean, I can go into a lot of reasons why I would do this differently, but at the time I was like, capes. But they were they were not on trend at the time, and I thought they were really cool. And I picked them because, I had $5,000, so I had to be really tight. And they were sizeless. They were one size fits all, which is really important at the time because fit is such a problem with clothes. So they were one size fits all. They were kind of timeless, which is what I was trying to make something. My clothing company is called Ellsworth at Ivey. Ivey's my last name. Ellsworth was my grandmother's last name. And the idea, she didn't obviously start it with me, but the idea was I wanted to make timeless pieces that both my grandmother and I would wear and enjoy. So it was kind of the opposite of trendy. Span generationally.
Classic.
Classic is, you can never go wrong with classic. That's, chasing trends is really difficult. And I think there's you're kind of towing a line that you can very easily fall. So I was trying actually at the time, as risky as it is to start a business, I was trying to mitigate risk as much as I can by eliminating factors that I found were problematic, which was fit, which was trend, only being able to serve a small market or a small market of like body type, et cetera, age. So I landed on these capes, but I didn't have enough money. I mean, because I had I think I spent, looking back, I wish I would have I should have. I always think about this. I ended up incorporating the business in New York State. I should have done Wyoming. I didn't, or Delaware. I didn't know enough. And it was really expensive. It was like $1,500 to do this. So my $5,000 gets whittled down to $3,500. So I'm like, shit.
Yeah,
This is going fast. So so I couldn't afford fabric, but I figured out that you could buy these. I bought these blankets from Peru. Peru has like beautiful, beautiful textiles. And they're these I don't even remember how I found this, but baby alpaca blankets. So they're not actually made from babies. I don't know why they at all call it baby alpaca, but it's just like a really soft version of alpaca. So I could buy these baby alpaca blankets, and there was no duty because there's a trade agreement with Peru and some of the other countries down there. There was no duty and there was no minimum. So I, caught a break with a friend that knew somebody that introduced me to a woman that kind of was like a production manager in New York. And so what that meant was she, in the garment district in New York City, which is where I made everything, she knew a bunch of factories and she would help, like I would go to her and she would help me find the factories to make them with. And because I didn't know anything about fashion. I didn't know how to do anything. Like it was actually crazy to me that I thought that I could even start this, considering how little I knew. I didn't go to fashion school. I didn't do any of that. So Flora Yen was her name, and she instrumental in me having this business. And I learned so much from her. So anyway, we made a few samples. I was dating a guy at the time. I ended up dating from like 21 to 5 years, first 5 years of my like post-college life, and he was a lot older than I am. I feel like there's people in your life that have helped you so much. We're still very good friends. Like he helped me so unbelievably much. Because he was older, he had all these friends that all of his friends' wives were now, I guess they're like my age now. It's like 35, maybe late 30s. And they were all kind of ladies who lunch, if you must say.
Sure.
So, they lived in the Upper East Side of New York. They lived in Greenwich and all the suburbs of New York City.
But they were classy and timeless.
Yes.
And
they were the perfect demographic.
For what you were looking for.
They would invite me to these ladies' luncheons. They're very big. I don't know if they're just an East Coast thing, but they're really big on the.
I think it's an East Coast thing.
Yes, these ladies' luncheons.
Yes,
and it's basically just a bunch of like very wealthy women who get together and lunch, like pretty literal. And a lot of these they would end up with having vendors, and the women would shop. And so I started to get invited to these through the friends, and people loved these capes. I'll never forget the first cape I sold at a trunk show. I don't know if I should say her. She's from a very famous family. She's from the Hearst family, so she does like all the magazines. literally threw, she had no idea. They were $500, my capes. They were $4.95. So they weren't cheap. She loved them. She bought 2. She like threw her black card at me. And I was like, oh my God, I've made it.
You're like,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, it was a really, I was, like, this is crazy.
She literally like threw it.
Yeah, she like threw it. She was like, here you go. And then she goes, wait, how much is it? I was like, $4.95 each. She's like, okay, whatever, charge it. I was like, oh my God.
Wow.
It was really crazy. But yeah.
This is it.
Yeah, this is it. I am at the top. So, there was unfortunately, that's not what happened. But
sure.
So I would take after I would take these orders, and then I would order the alpaca from Peru and then quickly make them. So there was like a 3-week turnaround time, and I would get like little labels and hand sew them into my grandmother had all of her coats would have like her initials like hand sewn and labels. So I would do that, like old fur coats, very vintage fur coats. They'll do that. Anyway, so I was working full time the whole time I did this too. So I didn't stop working full time till I was maybe 25. But basically from starting the business up until like I stopped working full time, I just like hustled like I don't know. I just hustled so hard. So I would wake up every day at like 4:45. I mean, because I had a pretty intense job. And so I would wake up every day at like 4:45. I would work before work on my business. I got like a bike, and I still had no money. I mean, I had the $5,000, so I still was really, really poor. So I got a bike, or it was my mom's bike. I took it from Connecticut. It was from like the 80s. It was a hilarious bike. And I outfitted it with like baskets and all of these things because I couldn't get up to the garment district fast enough. I couldn't afford a cab based on where I was. And I was too far of a walk from the subway because it was just like a really horribly placed office where I worked in fashion PR. So I would bike to work every day and then race up to the garment district and meet with my factories to like pick stuff up. And I was constantly like running around the garment district and I have like 13 capes, literally bungee corded on the back of this. It was so funny. I know.
This is so like New York. I like love it because New York is such a melting pot, and you see like a businessman and then you like riding by with like your capes, and then you like a cab who's like screaming and like guys cooking hot dogs. It's just like amazing. I just like have this vision in my mind. It's so amazing. You're just cruising through New York. It's all right, ding ding ding.
No, quite literally. I'll never forget once I picked up I had like 10 capes on the back of my bike, and I got one of the capes stuck in the tire.
Oh no.
And it destroyed the cape. And, I couldn't afford at that time for the capes to be destroyed. And I remember I'm just like on the side. And at the time, I feel like I was getting way more emotional. Now I'm not. Like a problem goes, I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm so used to the problems. But in the beginning, like a problem like that really felt like a big deal. And I'm just like crying on the side of like, and this guy, he's like, are you okay? And I'm just like hysterically crying on the side of the road with all of my capes on the back of the bike. And it was just, it was a very fun time, but it was also, I guess, a little like chaotic, but it was fun. So yeah, I did that for a while. And then,
So that was 3 years, right? From 22 to 25 that you were working and
so it was, I launched,
Ivey.
I like can't even remember the year. So I launched Allsworth and Ivey in 2012. So I graduated college in 2020. Yeah, I launched it the fall of 2012. And then I guess I didn't stop working full-time until 2016. So I guess it was 4 years.
Okay.
And so basically I take all my PTO days and I would, go and do trunk shows. I'd fly, for like 3 years in a row. It was my birthday in Chicago by myself because it was one of my best trunk shows. And I would just go do all these trunk shows. And I was doing pretty well with the trunk shows. And eventually the next season I was able to I had enough money that I could buy fabric. So I could stop the blanket routine. And I could actually pre-make capes. And then in I think it was 2014 or 2015, I ended up getting invited to go to Nantucket, which is long story short, that's where I have a store now. But all of this also was very encouraged by the guy that I was dating at the time. He really he really helped me get into like all the right places through a bunch of his connections, which I'm super, super grateful for. And
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Shout out to that guy.
Thank you, Nolan.
Yeah.
He
Nolan,
really.
we'll send you the podcast.
Yeah, he would love to hear this. Yeah. It was.
Well, real quick, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to say that one of the things I hear is, again, because we're talking about taking risks, obviously you were taking a big risk, but you're also mitigating your risk a bit, which I think is important for people who are listening to understand. It's like, okay, I think a lot of people think you have to start a business and you just have to go like full on, head on,
Definitely
right?
not,
I got to quit my job. I just go all in on this thing. And yes, you were all in on your business that you were starting, but you were making it work with like, hey, I also have to live. And there is some risk mitigation of like, hey, maybe this thing is like getting some momentum, but like it might not work out. It's clothing. It's kind of cyclical, the capes are doing well now. Maybe they don't do in the future. So you're kind of like, I think you're mitigating your risk a little bit. And I think I would encourage people to think about that, because I think a lot of people who think they want to be an entrepreneur, they think, oh, I just got to go like all, I got to make all this, like you said, push it off, make all this money, save up, and then just go all in. And that doesn't really happen. I feel like it's a common thread. Exactly your story is like, I'm still working this job and like my 9 to 5, and then I'm waking up at 4 a.m. and I'm working on it, and then 9 to 5, and then I'm all my PTO, everything. So I think I just find that to be a really common thread, and I think it's important for people to kind of like realize that. And there is maybe a bit of a bridge for you as a 4-year bridge until you're like, okay, I'm ready to do this full time. So I think that's cool what you did. And again, there is some risk mitigation there. I just wanted to acknowledge that. Yeah,
that's actually a real. I have always talked about this with some of like our younger staff members, when a lot of people, along the way have come to me like talking about like their business that they want to start. And what I hear, whenever I hear this, I almost like, it makes me almost really scared for them there are sometimes people will think that they have to quit their job, like what you're saying, and go all in. And I could not give advice. Like, I mean, my advice is so the opposite. Like, first of all, like when you're starting a business, for the first like X amount of months, it's pretty slow. Like you're doing, you're waiting on stuff, you're conceptualizing, definitely like before launch, it can get busier. It depends on like mine wasn't super busy because I was, doing it very like bootstrap. This is also like before like Instagram. I feel like Instagram came out right after I started the business, but like nobody used it for a few years. There wasn't really like, there was SEO, but there wasn't really any, there just wasn't a lot of, it was more traditional and like in that.
2012, I remember I was a sophomore in college, and I remember like, I even look back and I exactly remember the moment
when it started,
and it was like just kind of picture. Yeah, it wasn't what it is today. Obviously, there wasn't first. I think it was like 3 or 4 years. There wasn't even like shopping on there, right? Like really no commerce. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
it's so different now. People think, oh, I'll just do this, launch a brand, and then start advertising on Instagram or whatever. And that's still, there's no soul to your brand a little bit if you do that, right? So there has to be this whole you have to put like soul into your brand. So
100%.
Yeah, it's just different than it was.
And I think that, with that kind of mitigating risk, I always think that people should, like, if you don't have the discipline to get up at 5 a.m. and work for a few hours before your job and work late nights and spend your weekend working, I don't think you have any business being an entrepreneur, like, period. Just, if you can't do that, just find a different career. Because if you can't do that now, when you're working, like I work about 80 hours a week right now because we're going through this like crazy growth period. And if you aren't committed to doing that, then you, again, like, I just don't think that, I think you're in the wrong industry. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's okay if you don't want to do that. Entrepreneurship is definitely not for everybody. And I don't even know if I would always recommend it for people because it's a really lonely, hard route with a lot of reward, but also a lot of challenges and a lot of like personal challenges looking at yourself. And anyway,
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I think it's very glamorized.
Super glamorized, yeah.
And yeah, I just couldn't agree more. I mean, owning my own business as well, there's a lot of inward
so much
searching, and you have to have a lot of self-drive, and not everybody has that, and that's okay. I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. It's Yeah, it's a challenge. It's challenging.
It's challenging. And I think I find it very lonely. I guess you have, Scotty's your partner, or was.
I have no business partner. His name's Nick.
Nick, okay. So,
yeah, Scotty works for our company.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and it can be nice that,
to have a little bit of a sounding board.
Yeah, definitely.
I had that for a bit with one of my businesses. We can get into it after, but I've also like gone through a business divorce, which was like a whole another period of my life. I've gone through a lot of this. But yeah, so just to sum that up, I always think that, you want to walk before you run, because what I find a lot is that people exhaust themselves and their finances to, like, owning a business. A lot of times it takes like 3 years to even be profitable technically. And like, if you can't sustain yourself for 3 years, you're screwed. So I'm happy the way that I did it, because I also, I certainly didn't come in to New York with savings, as we've talked about. I still was working jobs where I wasn't really making any money. So I didn't have any savings, and I had these expenses, ended up being $1,000 a month that I paid for my student loan payments, which was really crippling to me it was really hard. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about student loans and all of that, but it was really challenging to make it all work. So I'm happy the way that I did it, and for other people, if they can do it that way, where they kind of, at least for a little bit, until they feel like they're ready, and it can actually support them, and it's so sort of safe. I wouldn't, if you can, I would work it on the side as long as you can.
Absolutely, we have some semblance of that in our business, because we have producers that they kind of run their own show. Like, we have the agency side and then producers. Mm-hmm. And I tell every producer, you have to be ready to take the leap, because you have to go into it full time. Being a producer, that is one thing, but we'll have the support of our agency. We can help financially a bit, but for the most part, like, there's a prep period where, like, you have to have some savings, and if you want to really make this work, and they can make it work really quickly, because a lot of them are still in a production role, but they want to get into something a little bit more, like, they have a little more like control over, they're not working for a big corporation or something like that. So no, it's definitely there. It definitely takes a bit of prep or time to, like what you said, like bridging that gap, and, until you're ready.
Until you're ready.
Yeah. You have to really, I think the majority is like mentally ready, right? Like, 'cause that's more than even like physically, financially, it's mentally, it's a grind.
Yeah.
For sure.
And especially too, if you're like, I was at a point, I'm 22 years old. I had no dependents. I had, nothing to lose. But if you're older and say you have a family, say you have I just don't see how you could, that would be really hard, I think, to just drop everything for in the very early stages. I would always suggest kind of balancing the two until you're ready, which I think most people as they get older do. I feel like it's more of like a younger person's mentality that oh, I'm going to start my business. I have to quit everything and work on this full time. At least that wasn't my path.
Yeah.
So kind of, okay. So I started going to Nantucket to do these trunk shows, and they were in the summer, and I'm still making capes and blazers. We started making blazers too. And
Ladies blazers, I love it.
Yeah, they were really cool. And by the way, when I started my clothing company, the capes, unbeknownst to me, capes were actually the top trend of the season at Fashion Week. Which just ended up being, it was honestly pure luck. It really, I mean, I would like to think that I had a good eye, but I think it was just really luck. And business can be a lot of luck. I think you make your own luck, but there's still some gifts here and there that come through. So anyway, I started kind of going to Nantucket and doing trunk shows out there, and did super well. It was getting warmer now, but it was traditionally very cold in the summer there. And I ended up getting invited to do this trunk show. It was a pop-up, like a shop and shop, and for a whole month in August. And I had left my other job, and I was about to start a new job in tech sales. So I was still trying to progress my career. And I basically took a month off in between, postponed my start date of this tech sales job that I was taking, and went to Nantucket and did this, worked basically an area of the store for the entire month, and did incredibly well. And it was really exciting. Anyway, I go back to New York after that, start working full time at this tech company, and I basically decide at that point that I wanted to open a clothing store. And because I had such a blast in Nantucket, I was like, how do I live here all the time? Like, how do I spend all my summers here? Well, naturally, I should just open a store because,
there we go.
That's where my brain goes. Do I regret that decision? Maybe a little. I don't know. But so kind of fast forward, I ended up opening a store in Nantucket, or this is 2016 is when we opened it. And I found this lease on Nantucket that was really large. It's like 2,000 square feet. And obviously that was too big for my store or for my brand. So I ended up bringing in some other, two friends that also had clothing companies or fashion brands. And we set it up as like a collective because we didn't have any money. Like, story of my life, I have no money. So we still have no money. 2016, I'm still really poor.
Were you full-time now? For your brand,
no,
or did you work? You're still working at the tech?
I'm still working, and I basically go full time when we open the store.
Got it.
So we didn't have any money, and Nantucket was this we were only required to put $7,500 down to sign this lease on like a store that was, I don't know what our rent. I think our rent was $100,000 for the year. Yeah, so they let us put $7,500 down. I don't really understand. So we split that. So we split it, and that's how much we put in, and then that's all the money that any of us had. So we set it up as a shop and shop. So we started selling areas of the store in sections and to brands. I mean, we got some really big brands like Orla Bar Brown, Serena and Lily. I don't know why I'm blanking on all the other ones that we brought in, but like some from very large brands that wanted to do the shop and shop with us. And they basically paid us in advance for the summer, or paid us like partly for the summer, which so then that was the money that we needed to do the build out. And so we opened the store. It's called the Skinny Dip. I still have it. So this is our 10th year. Does this make sense? Maybe it's our 9th year. Clearly I'm like not great at math because I feel like my dates
2016, yeah, we're eighth going on.
But it's like our 9th summer, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah. So this will be your 9th summer.
Yeah. Anyway, so we opened this store, and I never even worked in retail, which is like hilarious. None of us had. And I think I was a little naive to that as well. Like, retail is a really hard industry. And so we open it, and none of us were prepared for how well it would do. Like, I can remember, and again, not working in retail, we had no idea like how to even like set up a retail store. And it's like inventory is complicated, all these things. And I can
merchandising, and the whole, everything is.
It's hard.
I had a friend that worked in merchandising. That's a whole
job
process in itself.
Mm-hmm. And I remember when we opened late, and there were like people like at the door, like banging, trying to get in when we were supposed to open. And I just remember talking. It was Sarah and Millicent were my two partners. I was like, we literally, like, the whole floor is covered in merchandise. We ended up spending, I think we pulled like 4 all-nighters in a row just to try to get the store open. And I'm like, don't open the doors. Like, don't let them in. And anyway, I ended up quitting my job, and I was the manager that summer. Again, hilarious, never managed a store. It was grueling. It was a grueling summer because everybody else still had full-time jobs. So I worked out there all summer. Also was, I've had some fortunate breaks along the way I was dating a guy at the time that I dated for a long time that had a house on Nantucket. So like there were pieces that like I wouldn't have been able to afford, but I was lucky enough to be with a partner that could help me through that. And I always like think about those, again, like the people along the way, like even Nolan, my first boyfriend, when we lived together, I didn't pay rent. I honestly like couldn't afford rent. I was so broke. And that's something that I guess traditionally is a benefit more of like females. And I can't say enough about how that was instrumental in helping me start my business. Like those little breaks, like, yes, I started my business by myself, but there were people along the way that were instrumental in supporting it and fostering it. And I would have never gotten off the ground without probably honestly either of them. And I'm super grateful. So anyway, we started this store. I worked it all summer, really exhausting, really hard. Did very well. one of my partners ended up leaving kind of right away because her brand was doing so well. She was like, I don't have time for retail. So it just ended up being two of us. And what happened, and this is kind of where like my business shifted, is I was making these capes and these blazers, and I decided to make this. I had started to make a little bit of sweaters, but I decided to make this like vintage looking Nantucket sweater. And what's funny about it is the factory that made it, there were like two versions of the sweater. There was the first one that like the text looked crazy on, and then there was the correct version. I spent like all of my money on making these sweaters, and they produced the wrong version. I get these sweaters, like, you know, I'm literally like crying so hard. I'm like, oh my God, it's over. I've spent all my money. I'm going to get stuck with all these sweaters, whatever. Anyway, so I'm like, they're like, okay, we'll reproduce them. Just try to sell the ones that you have. And I was like, okay, no one's going to buy these. They look crazy. Like, people went bananas over these sweaters. Like, we still sell 2,000-3,000 of them every summer. This many years later,
same one with the messed up font
sweater. Yeah, you can't read it. So it says Nantucket, but all you can actually see is Nantuck because all of it's back here. Like it's, you know, it goes on theme. It's like it looked like something your grandmother knitted for sure. Like maybe when she had a few cocktails. Like that's how crazy it was. So it just did really well. And when it basically ended up pivoting my business because the stores were really, really time consuming, and I couldn't handle the other part of the clothing business where the traditional clothing line where, you know, you make a collection, you go to a market, which is like a trade show, you sell it, you're working really, like I couldn't, making stuff in the garment district was extremely manual because all of that just became too much with like, I needed to be on Nantucket. I couldn't be in New York to do it. So I ended up kind of deciding to, after people started reaching out to me, stores being like, hey, I've seen this sweater everywhere. Like, could you make that for me? So I ended up pivoting the business, Ellsworth and Ivey, which is the clothing company, to a custom knitwear business. And this ended up being, I mean, that's what we are today. And again, like all those pieces along the way where if I hadn't had that store in Nantucket, I would have never made the Nantucket sweater. And I ended up pivoting to this custom knitwear business because I didn't have the bandwidth. So we did no outreach. It was just me running it on the side, but people would just reach out to me. And then it was pretty easy for me to make because it was really lean. Like I would just design it for them. They would approve it. It would just get shipped directly to them from my factory.
You already had the hookup.
Yeah.
Like, hey, make this one, this sweater, boom. Okay, done.
Yeah. And so basically I started the Skinny Dip. We pivot. I pivot Ellsworth and Ivey to being this custom knitwear business. And then the next like 5 years, up until kind of 2020, so 4 years, I guess, it is just, we opened 3 stores in 3 years. It was just mania. Like retail also, like that's a really big business for risk. I don't think I was very aware. We mitigated the risk by everything being a shop and shop. Like, again, like we couldn't afford to buy inventory, but we also couldn't afford to sit on inventory. So as a shop and shop and a collective store, we didn't own any of the merchandise. It was all consignment.
Gotcha.
So at the end of the season, we would just pack up whatever we had left and we'd ship it back to them. And it felt like there were challenges with that, meaning like you were never really getting like the best product. You couldn't get replen of it. So it took years before we could launch an online store because we didn't have any extra inventory. And then there were a lot of brands that didn't want to work like that for obvious reasons. Like everybody just wants a wholesale account.
Sure.
But it allowed us to, start a business with $7,500 investment.
Absolutely.
So it kind of worked out in that regard.
There's some really cool. Sorry, it's so much to unpack there, and I love this. I'm like so like in this. It's amazing.
It's been a long journey.
No, it's unbelievable. I'm so fascinated, and this is so cool. I'm learning all this stuff. But one of the things just to kind of unpack there was like, okay, the risk reward. You took like we were talking about earlier. You get to a certain point where you're like, okay, I gotta go full time. This is if we're gonna make this thing work. Mm. And yeah, every entrepreneur gets to that point where I have to do this full time and sacrifice what I was building over here to then build here. Obviously, that put you off in a different trajectory, and yeah, it's great. The second thing I hear is the risk on the sweaters, which happened to be kind of an accidental reward, but it was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to risk it. I know these sweaters are going to, I have a good feeling. You're never quite certain that, anything is going to work out in life, right? But you're like, hey, I think these sweaters are going to be a hit. They come out, they're the wrong ones. But then I just think that's so serendipitous. And like you said, the universe presents you with things. It's so great that risk turned into such a huge reward, and you're just continuing to sell like thousands of these sweaters.
Crazy.
And it's just, but like you said earlier too, and I'm such a believer in this, is like you make your own luck, right? That you initially thought that was maybe kind of an unlucky break. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, but now it's turned into an amazingly lucky break, and then allowed you kind of to just off that one pivotal moment allows you to then shift your business, and then you're like, okay, great, I kind of have this new direction, and now you're opening 3 stores. So it changed
my life. Like it was a piece that ended up changing. Funny story about when they actually produced the ones that were correct, I couldn't sell them. Nobody wanted them.
Yeah, because they're like, we like the other ones.
Yeah. It was so funny. I got stuck with them. I think I had to like give them away.
Oh my gosh.
Hilarious.
So yeah, wow. That is so, yeah, it's crazy how I think there are these large may seem small at the time, like that one sweater, like changed your life basically. But there are moments, and there's only, I think, maybe a handful of moments, maybe 10 moments in your life that like this, you can nail it down to this one pivotal thing. Mm-hmm. And because you took the risk on it, it didn't really work out. Okay, let's kind of taking a risk on selling it. Let's see what happens. And it changed your life. And that's just amazing. I love hearing stories like that and just change your trajectory. It's so
I'm really grateful. I think, there was a moment where, like you're saying, I was really upset about it. I felt like I had taken a risk and it had blown up in my face. Because it was probably one of the bigger risks that I took, because I was always mitigating risk by doing made to order things or trying to, not get stuck with inventory. And it was a really big lesson for me in my career that, I feel like there constantly are times where there might be a style that I make that I'm like, this is my least favorite style, and it's the one that does the best. Like, there's a little bit of like, you just don't know, and you have to just kind of surrender to, and just like let it take you where you can't control everything, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that ended up being a really good pivot. So I ran Ellsworth and Ivey solo for a long time while we're running all these stores. I opened one, and so we had Nantucket. Nantucket's a seasonal business, so it's still seasonal. So it's really only open like 6 months of the year, in May through October. And then the next one, this is probably the biggest risk I've taken in my career. This is a moment where it didn't super work out for me at the end. But again, it is what it is. And I learned a lot of stuff along the way. But we ended up opening a store in Charleston. That was my second store. Sarah was my business partner at the time. We were 20, I guess I'm like 25 then, maybe 26. We find this lease. We were so excited by how well Nantucket had. We got a little over our skis a little bit. And we find this lease. It's a 4,000 square foot, which is like really, really large. A 4,000 square foot. It was a restaurant. They had a new owner of the building, and he didn't want a restaurant anymore, so he was looking for a retail partner. 4,000 square foot store. It was two stories, but it had like a bar. Like it was a restaurant, so it had a bar upstairs, a kitchen downstairs, and we signed this lease. We personally guaranteed it because we had no business. It was a new business. And I remember my accountant being like, accountants are traditionally risk averse. Like, they're trying constantly to be like, don't take this risk. Or at least that's how my accountant was at the time.
Yeah.
And he was like, don't do this. And we're like, we're doing it.
Sometimes you just got to look in the face. We're going for it.
Yeah. And I don't, I'll get to kind of what happens to it later. But again, story, we have no money. Like, we really hadn't made very much money at the store because basically, like, everybody coming in covered the operating expenses. Like, all the money that we got covered operating expenses. And then how we all made our money was that we made basically 100% of whatever our brands did. So we did make money, but it wasn't certainly enough to open a store and do a gut renovation. So we decide to open the store in Charleston, and we decide to open it on credit cards. This is really risky.
Wow.
Yeah. So I remember actually my uncle, David, the one that let me live with him, he told me, so a serial entrepreneur, that he started one of his businesses on credit cards. So I was like, yes, I got this. David got this. I got this. So we do a very scrappy, like very involved gut renovation. It needed so much. It was honestly probably the grossest building I've ever been in my entire life. It was disgusting. And for like 5 months, I lived down in Charleston, and we did this gut renovation. I mean, we couldn't afford a good GC. I essentially became the GC. I would I was the one like getting all the subcontractors there, making, pleading with the city constantly, literally would have like sold my soul to the fire chief I still like have his phone number on my phone. Like there was really nothing I wasn't going to do to get this, we had to get all new permitting because it wasn't like a habitable space. Anyway, so we decided to open the store. We put in, I think we ended up with like $200,000 in credit card debt.
Wow.
Yeah. I feel like I became like numb to risk. I graduated with $130K in student loans. Like, I feel like I was becoming number and number to like, it's like, what's a little bit more, which I wouldn't, that's a little much. I don't know if I would super suggest that to people. But anyway, we opened this store. It was beautiful. Like, honestly, we did it unbelievable. It was so much hard work. The hardest I think I've ever worked in my life was opening that store. So stressful. For anyone that's done a renovation, you know that renovations typically don't go on the timeline that you're planned. Ours was, we actually only opened 1 day late. And it was because one exit sign didn't light up. So that was, it ended up being a blessing. We really needed the weekend to like merchandise. But we couldn't open late because we had the same model where like people had paid us and we had promised, and we didn't buffer it enough. We had promised that we would open on a date. So like we had to open. And anyway, we had this 4,000 square foot store, 2 floors. We had a bar in it, a coffee shop. We did an event space. It had an outdoor area. We would sell frosé. It was really, really beautiful. And so that ended up being our second store. And we opened it on a bunch of credit cards, which was, a whole nother problem with just like cash flow. And then we decided about 8 months later to open another store in Palm Beach, Florida. And kind of around that time, my partner and I think some of this timing might be completely off, but Charleston we were actually, I think it was 2 years later we opened. So maybe it was 3 stores in 4 years. We ended up, the Charleston store was struggling. It was our rent was $20,000. And I think back on it, I'm 25 years old when I signed this lease, 26 maybe. Sarah is a little bit older than me, but like not much. We personally guaranteed it. Like, I'm almost like, what was the landlord thinking letting us we signed a 7-year lease, would never do that in retail again. That was a mistake that's like a really big mistake that I made. We were doing a $200,000 build out, so like you don't really want to do that on a lease that you only have for a year. And I get that, but we should have never signed a 7-year lease. And like for anyone that's, in retail, like that's so long to commit yourself to without knowing if it's going to work out or not.
What would you recommend? Because that is a risk mitigation, right? When you're looking at it up front, 3 years or? So
I would always recommend, it depends on like what kind of brand you are. If you're like a boutique versus like your own brand store, if you're a brand store and you're selling like Robbie with like Wilbo, like that's like a marketing expense at the end of the day. And it can be qualified as a marketing expense. And you can look at it like either all or a portion of it as a marketing expense. When you're a boutique, that's not how it works. Like we were selling at one point 120 different brands in the store. And it was by no means like we had no business having it a marketing expense. So I would personally suggest certainly doing a pop-up first, low commitment, and just see if there's appeal for it. But it's kind of hard. It's harder to get places that want to do a year lease unless it's like something that's about to turn over. So I guess maybe 3, because typically retail takes about like 3 years for you to get your footing and to like be known enough. But I would always try to say like try a pop-up first, or just know that it probably won't make money for a while. I mean, it might, but a traditional retail store, like even the amount of money you need to even start a traditional retail store, because keep in mind, like we weren't owning the inventory, but like right now for my Nantucket store opening this season, it's like $500,000 of merchandise that we're buying. And that's like what it is. That's normal. And so in order, like you have to have enough money to do that too. So retail is just hard, a hard industry. You definitely, I feel like have to have some backing and or lines of credit before you could start something like that. I think starting a retail brand for your own personal fashion brand is a very different situation than starting as a boutique, like what we did.
Yeah. I had Robbie on actually the first podcast, and you talked a little bit about that, and he said that he actually started as a pop-up, and then he went.
It was a pop-up, yeah.
Month to month, and then he went 1 year lease, and now they're like 1+1, and they just like have like we talked about how he kind of mitigated risk
Very
mitigated
smart.
into this lease, and the property manager who I know he's an awesome guy, and he's been instrumental with us. Again, back to the people that you're kind of helping prop that up. But I completely agree with you, and we had a conversation about that when he first started. I was like, you can control that experience for your brand. Mm-hmm. So I could not agree more. Whereas a boutique, which you're selling different brands, it's like you kind of are it's just different.
It's super different. I mean, I think it's a benefit as a fashion brand. I do think that brick and mortar, I don't think, for so long everyone's like brick and mortar is dead. Brick and mortar is not dead. It depends on the market. So like Nantucket, oh my gosh, it is the craziest retail market ever. Like, I don't even think we need bodies in the store, and we would crush. And that market's it's better than my Nantucket store will make more than my Palm Beach store makes in 5 months than Palm Beach makes all year. There are markets like that across the U.S. I think brick and mortar is very difficult in some other markets, but I think when you're looking at it from like a marketing expenses of brands, like you can't touch and feel is still really like storytelling and feeling and touching fabrics or products or using it's not being replaced. It just might, maybe those customers that come in don't always convert in person in the future and they end up being online. I'm just a big proponent that retail's not dead. I think it's just different.
I saw a statistic that 85% of commerce is still done brick and mortar.
Really?
Only 15% is done online. And
that's
people
crazy.
think
I didn't
it's all
realize
online,
that.
but it's really actually still brick and mortar. They estimate in 20 years it'll be, maybe 25% or maybe 30%. But no, to all the points you just said, it's never going away.
Yeah.
There's certain things you just have to feel in person. You have to experience in person. And fit. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Fit is huge. For me, I have a very long torso and a big head. I have to go try. Every time Robbie drops a hat at Wilbo, I have to go try the hat on before I buy it because I'm like, is it going to fit my head? And things like that. Yeah. So it's really, it's an amazing statistic that I saw.
I did not know that.
It was a real estate guy who was doing a syndication, and he was just talking about the statistics of, and he's buying a big, huge, almost like a Fashion Island, massive retail center. He was just talking about how he's like, people think it's all online. Nope. 85% of commerce still brick and mortar. So.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I feel like also now I feel like people are less trustworthy of, maybe this is just my own speculation, but like we've been so inundated in social media with brands that I don't trust anymore really. Like if hypothetically like an influencer's showing it, like they're paid to wear it. And obviously like we've just started to kind of pay influencers to wear our stuff. So we're doing this too. But I don't know, like you don't know what the quality is. And almost like always when I buy stuff online, I feel like when I get it in person, I'm like, I kind of don't like it. I feel like I don't actually shop online very much because I end up returning pretty much everything. Unless it's like something I know fits, like jeans that I know my size in from the brand, like I'll buy it. But for the most part, everything is styled in ways that like I can't replicate. Like it might look great on that like 5'11" model, but it's not looking awesome on me. Like I just feel like it's not always realistic. Where, in person you can be a little bit more realistic with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we ended up opening this Charleston store.
It sounds amazing.
It was really awesome. Yeah, we sold. It's so funny.
I can envision it in my mind. 2-story bar and
it was so bright, and like we had the ceilings were like 20 feet high, and all the walls were brick. So we painted them all white. It was just so light and beautiful. I'm like happy. We really did a colorful, really beautiful job, and it was very community driven. Like we would have local artists do huge murals on the walls. It was really neat, and we got known for, we had this bar, and we would sell frosé at the bar. And what's like so funny about it, like we had outsourced the bar to a third party because we didn't know how to run a bar, and so they were making this frosé, and it was so good, so good, and kind of strong. Like I feel like I would drink it, and I feel like like kind of a little tipsy.
Yeah.
And everyone was loving the frosé.
That's exactly why they were loving it. Yeah. Feeling good.
So long story short, we find out that they were making it with liquor, which we did not have our liquor license.
Oh boy.
So I was like, oh my God, like we could go completely shut down. Like we can't do that. And then the frosé never tasted as good. We could never try it. And we were never able to replicate how delicious that frosé was. I guess you just needed the liquor. But yeah, so we ended up deciding to open up a store in Palm Beach, which is a natural next step to Nantucket. They're like a lot of people go back and forth between Palm Beach and Nantucket. And this is 2018 now. And maybe I must have actually opened the stores in 2015, if I'm doing the math right. But yeah, so this is 2018. And essentially at the time, my Charleston store was struggling. It was, you needed a really large staff. I handled at the business, like my role was operations. Like I handled all the operations of the store. I managed the whole team. I did all the finances. Basically, I did a lot, and all the build outs. And my partner did the marketing.
Sounds like they were one sliver and you were running the show.
It felt that way a little bit. I mean, she did a great job with the marketing, but it felt a little lopsided. And so
sounds like a hire, not a business partner.
Yes. So we ended up the Charleston store was really struggling, and I was working so much, and I kind of just came to her and was like, "Listen, I don't like it's draining all of our resources. Like we're spending all of our energy. It's not doing well. It's losing money. It's taking all of the profits from this other store. Like this has to go. We have to get out of this lease. We have to sublease it." And we ended up not agreeing on that at all. She lived in Charleston at the time, so it was kind of like her baby, which I can understand. And so we decided to part ways. So that ended up being this kind of really, and we were also in the process of opening Palm Beach. So I decided to leave because I was like, basically, either close this store or I'm gonna leave, and then you can run it by yourself. So that's what we agreed to. And I said that I would stay and open the Palm Beach store since I did all like the operations and the build outs and all that stuff. So I would open the store and then we would part ways. So it was like, 4 months later. And then kind of along the way, it became not super amicable. And I ended up going through the first like divorce of my life, I guess you could say. And it turned really not amicable with it started with like kind of the deal I was presented that was ruthlessly unfair. Like it was ruthless for what I had put in. I also had put in basically this, because Charleston wasn't doing well, we had to keep putting money in. So I had a lot of money, like proportionally like 70% more than she had in the business. And it just started to kind of pent up. And so we ended up going through like a 4-month, like very not amicable breakup. And kind of along the way, somehow like shifted where she decided she wanted to leave and I would keep the stores. And so I was like, okay, whatever, as long as one of us leaves. And after we ended up opening Palm Beach, like while we're going through all this, which was challenging. And then it ended up being like mid-March. So the conversation started like in September, and by mid-March, we had officially signed a contract, and she left. And so at that point, I became the sole owner of the 3 stores, with all the debt that we had accrued, and it was a lot. And I had to pay her out for a portion of what she had left. She had some cash in the business from contributing. We had to kind of pay that out. So it was a really difficult time in my life. I would say this is now in 2019. 2019 was, I mean, I'm not that old, or I like to think I'm not that old, but it was arguably the hardest year of my entire life. Like going through a partner breakup and a not amicable one, where you're so far. I feel like we were looking at 2 different, like we were seeing the same situation, but I was black, she was white. We were just kind of could not see the same and in the same way at all. And it was really, really, really hard. And really sad, and something we couldn't talk to our team about. So it's like kind of all going on behind closed doors. And so basically I ended up keeping the stores, and she didn't leave it in the best way. Arguably, she kind of like, I felt like she was trying to like light it on fire before she left, which wasn't great. And I still have my clothing company. I have these 3 stores, and it was just like everything's on fire. And it was so hard. And for basically mid-March through kind of like October, I was really struggling. Like, I think this is where, for a long time we were partners, and I could have a sounding board, and I had a teammate, and then I went back to being by myself. And I was really struggling. It was really lonely. I was like really, really, really struggling with mental health. I was working like 90 plus hours, working all the time, and I was so stressed. And I can remember I would like get to my office in the morning, and I would sit at my desk, and I would just start crying every day. And I would just start crying, and then I would kind of like shake it off and be like, okay, no, there's no time to cry, basically.
Yeah.
And I was just really struggling. And those are the pieces of being an entrepreneur that can be hard, because I felt like, I was dating this guy at the time, the same one that said the Nantucket, and who's also an entrepreneur. And I felt like he was trying to be as sympathetic as possible, but it's also really difficult to be with a partner that is like so depressed and so miserable, and so just like my world's like kind of falling apart. So that kind of went on for a while. Can
I ask a couple questions?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I'm an open book, so
no, yeah,
a
couple technical questions. So number one, what was it like? What were the discussions like partnering up with that past partner?
Like how we got together?
How you got together, and like were there a lot of discussions had on the front end? Because it was just kind of like, hey, you do this, I do this. Hey, okay, great. So that's one thing I wanted to ask. The second thing was like, did she partner and come into your entity, or did you have separate entities for each store? Because I think that's important for people to know, because there is some risk mitigation there.
Yes. But
also so front end, how did that look?
Yeah. I mean, this is, again, I feel like I was really young and naive. There wasn't a lot of thought. Like, the thing I would say is when you're thinking about a business partner, you have to be really careful about who you pick. And you need to make sure that your energy matches their energy, your drive matches their drive, that you're like, at the end of the day, like what you were saying about like that's an outsourceable role, you need to make sure that partner is non-replaceable. Like that they bring so much value that you couldn't just like hire somebody else. I feel like a lot of people end up being like, let me do this with my buddy. And Sarah and I we had started to do trunk shows, and we would see each other at trunk shows. And she is a really hard worker, and there was like a lot of good things like that she brought to the business. But it was really more of like, I found the lease, and I was like, oh, like let's bring in some friends. And it really wasn't thought about. We had a really ridiculously pathetic partnership agreement that really like, it's like one page. And those are things that in hindsight, you go into this thinking that it would never be a problem. And I have found out that it was a problem. I've learned a lot of lessons about about like having to, even though it's almost like, I feel like people who, oh my God, what am I? Prenups, I guess. So I feel like there was like it's so similar. Like
partnership agreement is like a prenup.
Exactly a prenup. And if I had, at the time you're like, well, we're never going to break up. Like we're a great match. And then when you get to that point, when you do, and you haven't laid the groundwork and made it really black and white, it gets really messy. And I went through that, and it was a serious lesson. So like anybody starting a business, again, be extremely careful about who you choose and make sure that you do take the time. And if anyone is offended by that, they're not the right person, because I would run. I feel like there's things along the way now, like working with so many different people and having so many like of these kind of things that have happened in my life. I feel like I'm quick to, I see a little hint of that and I'm like, oh, run. And maybe that's like not a great thing, but I feel that's what I would tell people if like somebody is like, oh, why do you want me to sign that? I'm like, why do you not want to sign it? Like, what is it about this that makes you not want to sign it? That to me is more of like the red flag.
Totally. I couldn't agree more with that. And I felt like, so far, knock on wood, my business partner is incredible. And I felt super lucky. And I was wondering how that kind of came about, because honestly, to his credit, he was very, not hesitant, but he was like, we need to have a lot of discussions before we actually, luckily for us, I wouldn't say luckily, but we're in the business of insurance and risk management. So we have a very detailed partnership agreement. I've helped many businesses because, part of what we do insurance, but we also do risk management. There's proactive stuff and partnership agreements and buy-sell agreements and all those things go in. The reason we always talk about that stuff, because if that's not in order, that messes with the business. If something, kind of what you went through could totally tank the business, and that's not, then you're no longer our client, So it's like, we want to make sure that we help you with that stuff. So luckily we had that, and we had a lot of discussions. I think you hit it nail on the head with everything you said. Your drive, are they indispensable? You have to match a lot of things. Your energy, just the way you want to go, kind of your value set too, right? Vision of what you want to, we talked a lot about what our vision was for our company and what we want to get out of it. That was a really important thing too. It's I think you need to have that conversation just frankly with people. What are you looking to get out of this business? And just see what they say, and someone might say, I want to make $1 gajillion. And you might say I want time flexibility. Man, maybe now it's not the right fit, right? Maybe it could be. I'm not saying exactly, but I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's just a really important risk mitigation thing that you need to do up front. And it's you'd be surprised it happens way more often than you think. It's just, it happens every day, really. People, And I hope that never happens to you again.
I think it's also hopefully a first business thing that if you make that mistake, you don't make it again. But I think unfortunately, I don't want to say that I don't trust people, but I feel honestly, I was nicer before I started my businesses. And I think there have been times in my life where I've been a little disappointed by people's values. And it's happened time and time and again where people have stolen things, whether that's a design or stuff. And, I remember I consulted, there was a piece, a small span of time where I consulted for this guy in New York. This is before I had the stores. And he worked for he was mostly did fur stuff, but he made a lot of jackets with fur trim on them, very expensive. And he would sell to Neiman Marcus and things like that. And we got hooked up because he wanted to grow a D2C brand. Honestly, I was really a horrible fit for that because I didn't even really have a D2C brand at the time. But somehow he was much older. He was 70 years old. So I'm he's looking at someone in their 20s. Oh, they must know how to do this.
Sure.
And we didn't really ever have a D2C brand until even more recently. But I can remember I had this cape design, really beautiful. And it had a fur, this is before we met, it had this beautiful fur collar on it. It was really, really, really special. It was removable, kind of trim all over it. It was really nice, very high end. And I walk in accidentally, I was not supposed to be there, to the office. And he is doing an appointment with Neiman Marcus with the head, what's her name? anyway, head buyer of Neiman Marcus, really big deal. And I had been asking him if he would make an introduction to me for like months, would never do it. He had made the exact, he just, because we were sharing an office at the time, so all my stuff was there. And he must have taken my cape when I wasn't there and brought it to a pattern maker and had it copied. And he was showing the exact cape, and they bought it. And they ended up buying like 1,000 units of this cape. And I was devastated, like just absolutely. Obviously, I quit, and I had a lot of choice words for him about karma.
What a snake.
What a snake. And that's what I was like, such a snake. And it was so, and when I kind of was like, how could you do that? Well, first of all, he just like refused to acknowledge it. Like it was pretty black and white. You could just look at the two of them side by side. They were exactly the same. Even like the fastenings were the same. But it was just really it was really sad. And, you know, pieces that's happened to me a handful of times in different ways. And it's what I've realized now, that's kind of just the fashion industry. But at the time when I was really young, it was pretty devastating. And I feel like some experiences like that have made me a little less, where I felt like I used to be extra trusting. I feel like I'm a little less trusting now, which I don't know that that's a great thing. But it's kept my guard up a little bit more than I was when I would just kind of like, when I was just, you know, you want to help me? I'm all smiles. And I feel like I'm just a little bit more.
I drive with that for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, entrepreneurship, it kind of hardens you a little bit in some ways. But yeah, I think what I've noticed a lot is like I'm just a lot more direct. I just cut out the crap, and I'm like, why are we just rip off the Band-Aid? Like, I don't take anything personally. You know, I will. It depends on like if it's a very extreme circumstance. Yes, I'd take something personally, but for the most part, if it's just a business, it's just business. Like let's just rip off the Band-Aid. If you feel a certain way, that's okay.
Yes.
Like, yeah, we need to be aligned here, but. No, I get that as well, because I used to be like all smiles and rainbows. And I'm not saying that you're not a joyous, happy person, but you're just kind of like, yeah, it takes a lot more to like to feel like, you know, I trust you 100%. And I think probably all entrepreneurs have that a bit.
Well, I think everyone has had those experiences. They get burned a little bit.
Yeah.
Or they watch an employee make a decision. You're like, those values are off. And that's disappointing.
Yeah. I think that's such a big thing when you're hiring people too. I mean, that is, again, also kind of risk mitigation, but you're like, you really have to look to see if they align with your values of your company. If you don't have values of your company, make sure to put out there, this is what we value as a company. And we talk about that every year with our people. And it's like, you have to make your decisions off of that as well. Of like, hiring and firing, right? If they're not aligning with your values, then it's like, all right, you're not going to probably be able to trust them, because that's
even if their work is great.
Yeah, if their work is great, because they're going to
toxic.
Exactly, and they'll make a decision that, like you just said, that you're like, I don't agree with that. That doesn't even align with what we are trying to do here. So, definitely a big lesson there, I think, for people. Yeah. So sorry, I got you off base. So I was curious about what that looked like on the front end.
Oh, and the LLC setup.
Yeah. Was each store its own like LLC?
Yeah. So we set up, all 3 stores are their own LLC. And then our ultimate like online business is also its own LLC. And, you know, we did that to obviously protect them. I think the problem with that for us ended up being that we were personally guaranteeing leases. So that protection kind of like is a moot point a little bit.
Sure.
Which, you know.
It's moot for a lawsuit, but it's not really moot from like a financial
exactly.
risk perspective. Yeah, because that'll protect you if like someone trips and falls or whatever.
Yes.
But it doesn't protect you of like, we still owe $200,000 for this lease and there's no store anymore or whatever.
It became a problem in the pandemic.
Yeah.
Which is where I get to the pandemic.
My gosh.
So Sarah and I part ways. I'm like, you know, dealing with the aftermath of that, which is not super fun. And I end up, my boyfriend and I ended up breaking up. Mostly I think, well, we weren't an awesome fit, but also the stress and the pressure of the stores. I was just not in a great place and not showing up as like a great partner. And I think he didn't really know what to even do with me because I was just so not great. Anyway, I ended up moving down to Florida, where one of my stores was, to kind of get out of New York for the winter. And I ended up in Florida during the pandemic. And that was a really crazy time for everybody, but also a crazy time being a retail store owner because obviously all my stores shut down like overnight.
Hey guys, just wanted to take a quick break to remind you that if you're liking this episode so far, make sure to like the episode and subscribe to my channel. It would mean the world to me. I'm trying to reach my first 50 followers by the end of the month. So again, like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and share this episode with anyone else you think might be interested. Now, let's get back into the show.
And it was incredibly frightening. And I feel like I was at a weird point because like maybe TMI, I had gone through kind of like 2019 being like just the worst year ever, which ended up being like the best thing that ever happened to me. All those things, like they got me to where I am today. I ended up going on this therapy retreat, for like 8 days. It's called the Hoffman. I feel like a lot of people know it. It's up in, it's actually in California. And I go on this, like right before the pandemic, I go on this. And I come out of it, and I'm just like in like a not so stressed out place, which I think became instrumental in how I ended up handling the pandemic. Because I think about that a lot. Like, had I not done that and I had gone through the pandemic, I don't know what would have happened. I think I would have just like completely shut down. Like mentally, everything.
The pressure would
have
so
just
intense.
Yeah. So basically, I was like coming from this, they call it like the Hoffman high. I'm just like really happy. I'm like, life's happening for you. I'm just like,
I've never heard about it.
I drank the Kool-Aid.
I want to talk to you after
oh my
offline,
God,
but yeah.
I will say it's the best thing that I recommend it to everybody. Best thing
Hoffman high. I love
best thing I've ever done for myself. Best investment I ever gave myself. Best money I've ever spent on myself. Wow. I couldn't recommend it enough. Really, really, really helped me grow. And anyway, so the stores, I shut down the stores. It was like, I was actually in California at the time when it was happening. And I can remember like, I'm in California and like I was in LA, and then all of a sudden everything starts shutting down and I'm at the hotel. They're like, we're no longer serving food. I'm like, oh shit, I have to go. I have to get out of here now. So I fly back. We shut down the stores. And look, my store in Nantucket was shut down anyway, seasonally, but we had to shut down Charleston in Florida. And it was this period of, like, I don't think, when I look back on it, like, what ended up being the best risk mitigation for that was that we were still a consignment model, which saved us, saved our asses so much because, and I wouldn't necessarily say, it might not be a bad place to start for some people, but I don't know that I would, there was all these other challenges that go with being a consignment store, but we would close the store and we shipped all the merchandise back. So where, like, the name of the game, I feel like, for retail is, like, merchandise and not getting, like, not overbuying, not underbuying, it's really, buying is really, really hard.
Yeah, for brands, anyone.
Yeah, inventory management.
He's like, that's the death of all brands and all
you don't
stores, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Just money sitting there just burning, basically. Yeah.
So we got really lucky in that regard. So we were able to ship everything back. I had to, like, let go of most of my staff. I kept one woman on staff. And basically for the next 2 months, it was us trying to figure out how to like save the business, figure out like what was going on with like when we were going to open again and if we could open and all of the government grants and all of these things. And I ended up, that Charleston store, a lot of things went on in that Charleston store. We actually had a horrible black mold problem that was happening before the pandemic. That was like a really big problem. Like girls were complaining about headaches. Like I ended up doing a environmental test and had crazy amounts of mold in my body that were the exact same mold that we ended up finding in the store that I think I got when we were opening the store and we were ripping up everything and I wasn't wearing a mask, which I should have. I don't know why I didn't think about doing that, which, ended up being this like whole health journey. And I Yeah, so we didn't, that store, because of like the mold, because of there wasn't rent relief, that, my burn rate was like, God, it was like $25K a month. I ended up shutting the store down. I told them that I was going to do it. We kept telling them I was going to do it. And then they just didn't, it's like they were just like not listening to me.
The landlord. He's like, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
we're not going to give you any rent break.
Yeah,
this is such a common thing. This happened to my brother's trainer. He had his own gym, and he just kept telling him, I can't do this. You have to work with me. And they're just not listening. And then, okay, well, shut down. Yeah,
so I go up there on I shut it down May 15th. We flash sold everything in the store, like the fixtures, everything like that. And I shut it down. I drove up to Charleston to do it. And I can remember, like, I shut it, I get a text being like, oh, wow, you actually shut it down. I'm like, well, what did you think? Like, what did you think was going to happen? I was telling you for weeks that we were going to do it. Like, they had violated their lease agreement because they hadn't fixed the black mold problem that was in the store. And
so that was your out.
Yeah. And it really, like, it ended up being, what was happening simultaneously is I actually was really sick. I got this nerve damage situation that happened that came out right before the pandemic that, I don't know, one doctor thinks it was from mold, others think it's from stress, like who knows, really. And I ended up getting really, really sick throughout the whole thing that I still have it, but I'm like so much better. I mean, I couldn't eat any food. I'm pretty thin, and I was 20 pounds lighter than what I am now. I was like a skeleton. I couldn't eat anything. Everything was having me get these really weird reactions. And it was really hard. It went on, it took like 2 years, kind of like right around when I met Seth was when I started to get healthy again, where I could start to like, I couldn't drink alcohol, coffee. I basically could only eat like vegetables. Like it was a really weird period of my life. So this is kind of all happening in the pandemic, which ended up being, it's not a bad thing because I have to eat really healthy now, and it's like changed my diet and opened my eyes up to like a lot of the food industry, which is like a whole other topic. I could probably spend literally so much time talking. You and
Chelsea just need to sit down and just talk all about it.
It's really upsetting to me.
Yeah, that's a whole can of worms in itself. We've been on that train
also
for a
with
while.
I feel like also with a new, like a child, you're like,
oh yeah,
how could I feed them these things that like we know are killing us?
Oh yeah.
So my body right now still is like, it's almost like this like radar for like, you give me some like seed oil that I shouldn't have, you process this and like you put some, spray on it, like my body reacts.
Your body is a temple.
It's honestly, it's a blessing now when I look at it. Like I feel like I'm really grateful because it keeps me in this line of being healthy. I feel better now than I did when I was 25.
That's amazing.
Like I really do. And I think a lot of it is diet. Anyway, so I ended up shutting down the store, got out of that. What I felt like, it was like, okay, there wasn't any money coming in yet. So I had to kind of like, it was either like declare personal bankruptcy, which I was very close to declaring. I mean, I had all the paperwork up. There really like, there was no money. So I was going through that process with my lawyer about like, okay, like about how to declare it. And basically my only other option was like declare it, break the lease, deal with it later. That's kind of what, and so I mitigated, I basically was like, it's either try to survive or just give up now. And, declaring bankruptcy is not for the faint of heart. Like it really follows you. It's really hard. I was going through like trying to figure out like assets and like, again, I didn't really have much money. So it's not like there was a lot of that, but it was terrifying. It really was terrifying. I think because of the Hoffman, I was handling it quite well. But yeah, that I ended up shutting the store down. We were able, because, I have to say, like, people might have a lot of opinions about Florida and, DeSantis and all these things. He opened Florida up. I was able to reopen my store, I think it was like April 20th. So we shut down March 17th. I opened it April 20th. And, with masks and whatnot. But I've never been more grateful. Like, as a business owner, there is no way I would have survived. Like, I can't figure out how any of these businesses survived in California. I really can't. New York City even, like, I don't know how they did it. I know everyone was pivoting and there ended up being government money, but like government money to a degree, like, sorry, the PPP, yes, that was like I'm very blessed to have gotten I got all of the different kind of loans, which was like a whole other thing. I don't know if you navigated any of this, but it was so hard. They made it really challenging.
I didn't navigate any of this
because
at the time it was just actually right when the pandemic hit, I was still working at my last corporation, big corporate job. And then in the fall, I quit and then took some time off, figured out with my business partner, Nick. So I didn't really start getting going. Yeah, so I didn't have to navigate that. But yeah, it was very challenging. A lot of my clients are calling me. I'm an insurance guy. Hey, do we have pandemic insurance? And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I literally had to be the deliverer of
so much heartbreaking news.
Just like, I'm really sorry, but that is an exclusion in your policy. And there's a whole crazy story on like Wimbledon. Like they were like one of the only places to
they had it?
Oh, they had it. They got paid out like multi-hundred millions of dollars. Because but no one like thought about that. It wasn't like
my ex-boyfriend did.
Wow.
Oh my God. I never forget this. Scott talking to me about this. This is obviously before the pandemic, and talking about taking these insurance policies out. And I guess, I don't know, maybe he did it in his career. And I don't really even know where he came from. I was like, I don't need that. Like, I mean, who thought this would ever happen? Like,
I mean, pandemic insurance, it really wasn't even talked about in anything that we did.
Yeah, I don't even know what that would like look like price-wise. I just remember him talking about it, being like, they're about maybe taking out something like for inventory, like, inventory loss insurance, all that sort of stuff. So I clearly didn't have any of that. And so I shut that store down. And then we ended up, Nantucket opened. It was also like, nobody knew, like, would Nantucket open that season? Like, what was going on? So Florida's open. I was working it by myself because I had let go of all of our staff. And I was very grateful that we were able to open because, I mean, we needed, and people were very, especially at that time with small businesses, like,
they wanted to support.
Oh my God.
Awesome.
It was so awesome. Like, the pandemic, there were so many, obviously not great stuff, but the humanity for maybe not like everybody was, I feel like not everyone was maybe thinking about the humanity portion of it, unfortunately. But I think like, civilians like you and I, people were really supporting each other. And I am really grateful that people were coming in and they were spending money. And, in like Florida, I think I got like 3 months free rent from our landlord because I was like, listen, I don't have it. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't have it. And, I was very grateful. Nantucket gave us an incredible break on our rent that summer. They basically like, what did they do? Oh, they didn't let us, we didn't have to pay anything till the end of the year. And whatever we were down, they took that proportionally off the rent is how they ended up doing it. And I'm just like, I'm very grateful. I didn't get that in one of the spots, like ironically from the richest landlord. But it is what it is. And so we ended up, opening that. And kind of about the pandemic and what ended up happening there was the pandemic was really scary in a lot of ways. But for me, it was the first time that I could like think because my stores were shut down. So I had, other than trying to navigate like the PPP and the EIDL loans, I didn't have 3 stores to run. And I took that moment of just like quietness and I started to work at my clothing company again. Because I had basically been working like 3% of my time on it. The fact that it even survived this long, like the whole time, like I'm talking about my stores, my clothing company is still like trucking along. She's still making sweaters, like we're still making these custom things. And I was able to kind of really focus on that. And then it also allowed us, we ended up getting the EIDL loans, which were these government, we have to pay for them. We had $150,000 for 2 of the businesses. And I mean, that's a lot of money. Granted, like all of that was needed for rent. Like it went actually very quickly. But also what happened is because we were a consignment store, there was all of the brands were really struggling with inventory. Like all the factories were shut down. I couldn't get inventory. Like the brands that had committed to us didn't have it. So we had to make a pivot to buying inventory. And that ended up being this pivotal moment in my business where, I mean, today we are a full wholesale store. We're no longer on consignment anything. And we make double what we were grossing over double what we made when we were in consignment because we started getting access to better things. We were able to launch an online store, which we launched in the pandemic because we could buy into inventory deep enough that we could have extra inventory to sell and have backup. It just ended up really switching things and giving a moment to, while again, it was really scary, it gave me time to think. I felt like it was the first time since I started this like race when I was 22 that I could like think. And I'm grateful for that. I was by myself in the pandemic, which I don't know if you were by yourself, but I literally.
I was lucky I was not.
A lot of self-reflection.
Yeah.
A lot of Hoffman reflection.
The Hoff-I carried you through.
Carried me through. Such a funny time.
I love it. Yeah, I was very lucky. My wife and I have been together for almost 10 years. But yeah, my in-laws had a place in Carmel.
Oh yeah, because you were up there.
Yeah, we were up in Carmel, which was like heaven on earth. We always like look back and we're like, we're so lucky.
Yeah, I mean, it could, for a lot of, what's hard about the pandemic is for some people it was horrible. This horrible thing. For others, it was life-changing. It was a moment of peace. It was a moment of reflection. It was a moment of growth, quietness. Like everybody, I always say that I felt like I was the best equipped. I was at the luckiest point in my life to go through the pandemic because it would have been nice to have like a buddy with me. But it is what it is. Like it's fine. But to have no dependence at the moment. The people that went through it with children and having to school them and also having to work and worry about their, like, I cannot imagine that. I mean, I was young, I was healthy, I was, more able to be kind of like fluid. So I'm very grateful. Like it wasn't like we were in college or high school and that whole,
or just coming out of college trying to find a job. You just graduated or you're about to graduate. Mm-hmm. That was my brother-in-law did his whole senior year basically through the pandemic. It's supposed to be senior year of college. It's supposed to be like your most epic year, you know? And no, I couldn't agree more. It was an amazing experience for me, and I feel bad almost saying that because I know it's so horrific for a lot of people. But yeah, I literally, you're taking the words out of my mouth. Everything that you're saying, it definitely feel for all those people. It must have been really hard, children especially, and all that. It's tough.
Yeah, I think just being grateful for it is like all that. Just recognizing it is what we have to do in that. And So I was able to reopen Nantucket, and then, had an okay summer there. We were okay. I definitely didn't make money in the pandemic. I definitely lost a lot of money. But basically kind of through all of that, I ended up kind of starting to focus, like the businesses actually started to do well because I ended up in these markets that like Florida was hot. Florida was hot in winter of 2021. Everyone was in Florida. And my business actually started to do really well. And now we're buying things, so we're making more money. And that ended up, it's just like these pieces along the way. Like the pandemic changed my business from being an unprofitable grind to a profitable business. This is my stores, where I could actually hire out and stop having to be doing everything. And it allowed me to actually then spend time to work at my clothing company. So really, like up until about 2021, I was barely working on my clothing company since I had the stores. And then I started to kind of focus on it again. And that's kind of like where, like, so now kind of where I ended up is I have 2 stores, an online business, and then I have my clothing company that has just, like, it's still a custom knitwear business, but it's really just been doing really well. And I'm really grateful.
Do you still sell to like third parties, the custom knitwear?
Yeah, so that's like mostly what we do.
And then do you sell a brand, like a front direct to consumer brand as well?
Yeah, so kind of what was happening was Ellsworth for a really long time barely was selling direct to consumer because it was all custom. So, a hotel, a college, a other store, whatever, country club will come to me and be like, I want to put, my country club logo on a sweater. And we make it for them and we just ship it right to them. We don't hold the inventory, nothing. And we did that, that's what we were doing the whole time I'm operating these stores. This is what I'm doing. And we're just like kind of slowly growing. And it was a really lean business. So I was able to operate it mostly by myself. Just like on the side. And when I say on the side, I was like, I'm working like 80 hours, 90 hours a week. So on the side,
yeah,
I was doing a lot. And, I have I guess at this time now I have 2 stores. The online business of my clothing store actually does quite well. So that's really, it's like own business. And then I have the clothing company and they're Ellsworth and Ivey. And so I just started to focus on it more. And it's just been like growing and growing and growing. And now I'm at a point where I don't really spend hardly any time on my stores. And I spend all of my time on my clothing company, and we've grown. We've got 10 employees now there, and we're doing quite well. But I was able, I think the way that I got through all of it was because touching on Robbie with inventory management being the most challenging piece of a business, and also just like inventory projections. Literally been speaking so much about this with this potential COO that I might hire,
totally,
because it's so hard.
One of the things I asked him, I wanted to ask you, maybe you're kind of, going into it, but I was like, how do you know like how much stuff to make? And
I would love to hear what he said.
He listen to the pod, but he basically said like a little bit of data from your retail stores, a little bit of
you just
customer feedback, and there's a lot of just kind of like a little bit of like maybe we add some more larges to this, and then kind of like let's see what happens.
Yeah, I feel like especially when you're starting,
very hard.
You have no data, so like you just got to throw something at the wall and see, and you hope that it's certainly better to be sold out than to be overbought. But like for example, we just launched our retro tennis collection. We launched with no product because our sales reps sold it all in between the process of us placing the order, and it didn't like get brought to my attention enough. And we literally launched. We had like 5 things. I was like, this is our big launch of the year. We have nothing, and then I had to do a reorder. But like you kind of lose the momentum, and it was unfortunate. And it's like lessons that you learn along the way. But yeah, I mean throughout the years of Ellsworth and Ivey, whether it was me being a made-to-order business with the capes, or it became I was this custom business where I had quite literally no risk, which for a period really served itself. Now as I'm in a growth stage, I have to start taking risk again. But when I didn't have the bandwidth to really properly kind of like evaluate risk, I just kind of personally like avoided the risk there by being this custom business where people come to me, they make an order, they give me a deposit, I make it with the factory, it's getting shipped to them, there's no returns on it, super lean. So that's how I had operated it. And now in this last year, I decided that now that I have my stores aren't like taking over my life, that we needed to go back to our custom business is doing extremely well. Let's go back to starting making collections again, where you do have to take more risk. Because if we want to grow, and there are partners that I want to get into that like I need to get into by having actual collections. Like we have no D2C business, which is not normal for a fashion brand. Like we're kind of the opposite. Like I feel like we've done almost everything like the opposite way, which is, it's all worked out. But right now, we started launching these collections that have done very well, and they are fueling our actually custom business, which is very interesting because people are seeing the designs and being like, oh my God, I love that. Can we just like replace this word with like my state name, my club name, whatever. But I know like that in order now to grow, I need to start taking more risk with, buying into inventory and spending money on digital marketing and all these things. But I've been interviewing some people. I'm trying to hire a COO right now. And one of the questions came up. It's like, so I never raised money. I started with I moved to New York with 114. I started with the 5,000, and that's all I've ever, like that 5 has turned into like a multi-million dollar business between all of them. Like it's kind of wild to me where we've come with just that little 5.
Yeah.
And how far I've come just from the moving to New York, having 114 and losing so much weight immediately because I literally had no food to eat. Or I did not know if Monday to eat.
Your story really reminds me, not to get you off track where you're going, but your story really reminds me of kind of like the Elon Musk story where it's like do you know the Elon Musk story where he literally is like the night before SpaceX was going to put him under and he was going to go bankrupt. He's like literally, and they got government funding. Like,
I didn't know that.
Literally like the day before he was like, oh, we're going to have to shut down the business. And and then now it's like, just into the stratosphere. So that's so cool. I love hearing that story.
I like that story. I do feel like you can manifest that kind of, like I'm a big believer in manifesting. Seth thinks I have like incredible manifesting powers, and sometimes I use them negatively against myself. He's like, watch what you're saying. He's like, you're going to bring it all to yourself. But I do feel like that. And I think actually, again, going back to that Hoffman thing, like, and just entrepreneurship, like entrepreneurship, life, leadership, like success, like so much of it is tied to your mental health. And if you don't have the right outlook and you don't have the right attitude, like you will fail, or whatever you call failure. Like it's very easy to get stuck in a loophole of like going back to like the world's happening to me, not for me, like to get really fixated on negative energy. Like I personally think like for some people, maybe not everybody, but like for me, I feel like my negative voice is louder than my positive voice. And I have to work extra hard to shut her out. And that's just something that I like know about myself, and it can be very easy to drop down into that. And I have been a big proponent since I started the business, since I was 21 years old. Like I have been on a kind of like a mental health journey and a, gratitude journey and just, growth journey personally. When I was 21 years old, like in college, gratitude journal every night. And I think that all of those pieces have gotten me to where I am because they've allowed me to, reframe situations and see the good in everything as much as I can and use that to my advantage. And because I think if you're constantly looking at the bad, you just keep bringing more bad to yourself. That is just like, I have friends and I love them to death, but like friends who trend negatively. And again, like I'm like that and I have to work extra hard to be the opposite. And I'm just like, oh, I just want to be like, you're bringing it on yourself a little bit. Like I know bad stuff happens, but like you're fixating on it so much and it's coming to you so fast. And you're in this loophole. They call it like a vicious cycle. You just can't, you're on like a wheel.
Are you glass half full or glass half empty?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If you're glass half empty, then the glass is always going to keep
It's always going to
down.
be empty.
Yeah.
And that has been, I think, the biggest journey with like being an entrepreneur is that like when I am in like what do you call it? Not like a high, but I feel like, you ever get in those like moments where you're like kind of buzzing. You're like,
yeah.
I don't know why I'm blanking on like the term.
Close a deal or something really cool happens and you're like, you're buzzing.
You're buzzing. You're just like on it. And if you can live in more of those moments, like whenever you're feeling like that, good stuff comes to you. Mm-hmm. It's like, you don't feel like that, I feel like bad stuff comes to you. And so that has been a really big lesson for me that I think has really helped me through the challenges and also just like to get to where I am is that I've consistently worked on trying to look at for the good and the opportunity and like learn and just kind of trying to stay positive and genuinely trying to manifest the success. And I think it's all worked in a sense. I mean, I didn't have a traditional, I feel like my path to success has been, it certainly has been very rocky. And it came from a very bootstrapped way, but like, I'm proud of kind of where I am and I'm happy with I wouldn't change any of it. And that gratitude has been instrumental along the way.
Absolutely. I mean, so I think that's a really good bridge of like, so, and you kind of outlined it a bit, but like where you are today, right? So you have the 2 shops and then you have your online. And they're still Skinny Dip? Is everything branded under Skinny Dip?
Well, they're different names, but it's like, the Nantucket store, the Palm Beach store are online. I skipped this, and we don't need to talk about it, but I did start another clothing company as well. I make dresses. I don't know why I did that. That was silly. But that's actually doing very well, so I'm like, whatever.
Yeah, so you got 2 brands.
So and then
also the 2 shops online, and then,
Yeah, it's a disaster. Seth always says, I'm always like, oh my God, I can't, like, I want to retire someday, and I'm going to, like, live on a farm in the middle of nowhere and, like, make my own butter. And he's like, yeah, I'll give you, like, literally one day you're going to start a new business. I can't help myself. This is so funny. But yeah, so right now I'm at this so basically the last 12 years of my life, when I say like bootstrapped it, like we bootstrapped it. The one piece that we never ended up finishing was my Charleston store, because I had to deal with the repercussions of breaking that lease.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And they sued me. They waited until I was kind of just like waiting for it. I knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
And they ended up suing me we had like, 4 years on the lease. They sued me for, I don't know, $1.5 million or something like that, which was like, I feel like at that point I was like almost numb to it all. I'm like, okay, here we go. Like, yeah. Yeah. And so they sued me for that. And I mean, we ended up settling in the 2022, but I had to pay $100,000 to them to settle, which at the end of the day, like, I had to sign that I would never sue them for the mold stuff. Like, I think I could have potentially won in court and walked away with nothing. But I looked at the time of it all. I was like, okay, the energy and the emotional stress. And one thing that came out of like that nerve damage I chatted about was it was a big realization that I had like destroyed my body with stress and overwork and fatigue and poor eating and all of these things that I had it was my body finally being like, you're running at a wall like at full speed, and I'm gonna try to stop this before you just like destroy yourself.
Yeah.
And so I feel like a lot of people were like, oh, why didn't you like fight? I mean, I did fight hard on it, but I ended up settling because I looked at it like, okay, what is gonna happen? Like, I'm gonna go for 2 more years, and all of my assets everything gets tied up. I can't do anything, can't make any moves. For like whatever, like a year or 2, the court systems are so tied up with post-pandemic stuff. And to go through all this emotional stress, like what do I get from that? And what am I actually leaving on the table? And how much money could I make? Could I make that up? I looked at it mostly like that, like, okay, if I have to pay this, could I make that up and then some in the time that it took for the 2 years that we wait to settle this? And then like, what if I do lose?
Totally.
Like, what was it worth? And then, like, the legal fees. Anyway, so.
Yeah, no, we talk a lot about that in insurance, honestly, because a lot of clients, they get frustrated because they say, oh, all insurance companies do is want to settle. And we basically have that exact same talk track of like, even if you do go to arbitration, all this stuff, it's going to cost so much in the end, and it's so much of your time, and it's so much distraction. And I'm not saying that I'm fully a proponent of settling for everything, but there are things that it's like, it is just better to just like try to cut your losses and settle. And obviously insurance, you're kind of transferring the risk to the insurance company a bit through premiums and stuff, and they'll deal with that, a lot of that headache. But if it gets really serious, obviously you have to come in. But they just get really frustrated. Clients are like, why are the insurance companies settling? And they make that exact same calculation. And yeah, there's like a risk reward there, obviously. And there's a lot of precedent to that, but yeah, it's something that's really interesting, and it's cool to hear you've thought through that yourself, obviously, and yeah, that is definitely, again, taking risks. You're like, should I take the risk to try to fight this, or should I just kind of settle it out and
move on with
my life? Yeah, absolutely. It's I think I was very mature and learned.
I don't know if like younger Taylor would have thought that way about it.
23, you're like, no.
Yeah, but older Taylor really like I really value my mental health now, and I really value like my body, and I just was like, I don't need the stress. It's not worth it to me.
Yeah.
And I think at this point I am also like, I feel confident in my ability to create things. And so it's like, instead of looking at it like, oh, I lost $100,000, it's like, okay, well, I gave myself back emotions and not having stress and being able to move forward with my life. And I gained, like I would have, if I had not settled that, like I don't think my clothing company, because I couldn't even, everything was, because I personally guaranteed the lease, everything was on the line. I couldn't like do anything. I couldn't buy a house. I couldn't do anything until I had settled that. And it was really important to me. And again, like a lot of people didn't agree with that decision. Like friends, family members thought I was crazy for doing that. But I stand by it. I have no regrets there. Maybe I wish I fought a little bit harder, but
they weren't in the situation.
They weren't, and they didn't.
No, you have to do what's best for you.
Yeah, they didn't go through a pandemic.
It's so easy to say like, no, you should fight it. It's like you don't understand what I've gone through. And so everybody's story is different.
So so that kind of like that's how that kind of bookend closed. But now, kind of coming to where we are today, I'm at this new phase of my career where I feel like my clothing company, my stores are pretty like steady. They're just kind of like sort of run themselves at this point. I've been very fortunate. I have to do a little bit of work, and they're definitely still like they're at a different phase of where they are at their career. It's been like 9 years, but now Ellsworth and Ivey, we are growing really, really fast. It's kind of crazy. It's like basically I abandoned it for 9 years, 10 years. The thing wouldn't die. I am so appreciative that like I feel like I was really given a gift. It just didn't die somehow along the way. And now, I mean, we're just like, like this last week we made more in a week than we made the whole month last year. More than that, like by like 20% more than we made all of last year in just 1 week or last month or last March. And we're pacing really fast. And with that now is this whole new set of challenges that I think I'm finally maybe mature enough to, I feel like when I was younger, I wouldn't have been as receptive to like not being the right person to lead us into this next chapter. But now I certainly I know my strengths. I know my weaknesses. I know my pitfalls, and I'm at a place where we're growing so fast. I don't know how to successfully, I know how to build businesses. I know how to create money. I feel very confident in that ability. What I am not awesome at, or I have no experience in, is taking a business from like a $10 million a year business to a $100 million a year business. No clue. And that's most entrepreneurs don't know how to do that. It's a skill set and it's an experience level. And I'm at a place where I'm seeing us move so fast, and it's been, I kind of not having a lot of experience even as like a managerial level. I left working when I was 24, 25 years old. I didn't really I had some instrumental bosses along the way that were I didn't have the experience of working under a mentor that I learned everything from. I just have taught myself books, online, really just kind of self-taught. And so now I feel extremely, I'm not equipped, or I don't have the experience to lead us through this next phase. And I don't want to miss the opportunity either. So I recognize that we need to bring somebody else in that really can do that. So I've been interviewing COOs and people who are extreme, their whole job is they come into these businesses and they help them navigate scale and set up their structure in a way. And that is, I had this conversation with a friend and they were like, okay, what do you want? You could have, number one, you could have this small business that you just maintain, where I'm at now. And we do, definitely do well, and we slowly grow. And, but right now, I'm working 80 hours a week on it. I'm wearing all the hats. I have 10 team members, but I'm still the most senior person, and I haven't set up a hierarchy and an org structure that, unfortunately, it relieves myself that much. That's those are skill sets I feel like I don't have. Sure. I'm more outside of the box thinker, vision, just whether I may not be the smartest person in the room, but I am the hardest worker. I feel that very confidently about myself. But now my friend was saying like, okay, do you want to just keep it as is and maintain and just like take money and, work how you're working? Or do you want to have some help and bring in someone that will help you scale and then you exit? And so the phase I'm at, I didn't even really need to think about it. Like, I don't want to stay at where I'm at right now because it's not sustainable how much I'm working. And I know like wanting to have children, like as a woman, I think about I know as a man, you think about this too, but specifically as a woman, like I am hyper aware of, I'm 35 years old, I'll be 36 in November. Like I am aware that my body is not always going to let me have children. And I've put it off quite a while I've been building all these businesses, but I don't want to work at the pace that I'm working when I have kids. I don't think that I could do that. And so I've been kind of slowly planting my own seeds in my mind about like how I can prepare for that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going through the route of hiring somebody because I want to scale and sell the business in maybe like 5 years, 10 years, I don't know. And when I was talking to my friend about it, just explaining that decision, it's really comes down to like, well, I think every entrepreneur's dream is to exit, to successfully, maybe not every, but like to go through a successful exit because it's like it's a learning experience. It's a whole exercise. Yeah. It's like you take something from start to finish. You've created something and then you end something, or it doesn't end, but like you close a chapter on it.
There's also multiple exits.
100%.
I think that's not talked about enough.
Mm-hmm.
I was just in like a webinar, like learning about this too. It was about, also I'm very into operations and scaling like as well. And that's what I mainly do at our agency is like all the internal, I'm basically the COO if we had to put a label on it.
Really important role.
Yeah. But they were talking about there's multiple exits, right? Where you exit from like manager to then CEO, which it sounds like you kind of are, but you're still kind of manager and then trying to get to the CEO, which CEOs are the forward thinkers, right? You said you're creative and you have a good vision, and then CEOs look backwards.
Yeah, you're taking a vision and you're making it happen.
Exactly. That's cool that you're kind of risk mitigating with that. And what I heard throughout what you said was just basically like, you don't know what you don't know. And that in itself is like its own thought process and mitigation where you're like, I just don't know what I don't know. And I don't know how to take this business from here to there. So you have to risk mitigate a bit. If you kept going at the same pace and tried to do it, maybe it would work, maybe it wouldn't, but there's kind of a balance. But the point being, sorry, to get off track, but we have multiple exits: manager to CEO, then CEO to maybe board member, to then board member, to then maybe fully exit. So there's multiple exits. So just to kind of elaborate on that, I think when people think exit, oh, you sell your company, you make all this money. It's
cash,
like maybe but I think there's also other ways, right? And then maybe just a succession plan. Like we tell my business partner and I have told our producers like we want to exit, but like a dream would be like if someone like rose up and then like bought us out internally. That would be amazing, right? We grow this business to a place where someone wants to do that, right? That would be so incredible, And it's, again, maybe that happens, maybe not. Maybe an external buyer buys the business, or who knows, right? But no, yeah. Sorry to
no. I think that's really important to talk about because there are so many ways that an exit looks, and I think an exit is also very different. Like some people, they don't want to ever necessarily like leave. They just need to like open up time and they want to stop doing certain roles and all of that. And that's kind of where right now I'm trying to, exactly what you're saying, I'm trying to stop being the everything to being the creative director, CEO.
Yeah.
And
something that goes through my mind is I love this saying, but it's the more valuable you are to your business, the less valuable your business is.
Yes. Well, you can't like if you took away me at the moment, like it would be like it would definitely run, but at a certain point, like they're going to hit roadblocks, and that's not, you cannot operate a business that way. And also, like if I did sell the business, depending on how, hypothetically, say it's acquired by a bigger business, if you make yourself so instrumental to that business, you're not leaving right away. You're going through an earnout, which could be anywhere between 1 to 5. My brother sold his digital marketing agency to a really large company, and they're on a 5-year earnout. And when you go from being a freedom entrepreneur where you have the freedom to do whatever you want, and then you go to being a business purchased by an incredibly large corporation, like
you have a boss.
they are they hate it. They hate it. Like,
sure.
And that has been I've heard that from everybody that I know that have gone through the kind of the acquiring. It completely changes your company, for lack of a better word, company culture, like completely changes everything. And so I am actively like, I feel like I'm constantly thinking about the strategy of an exit and what that would look like, and trying the best I can to bring people in to just slowly replace me so that I can, just quietly back away and then maybe go into another role, so that like if we did get acquired like that, like I wouldn't have to be. That was a huge advice that was given to me by a friend, like an older guy friend that I have that has sold a bunch of businesses, and he was like, you just keep walking backwards. You don't want to go through that transition period, and you don't want to have to like stay on for X amount of years. Just try to just keep empowering people to do that. I think it's a little bit harder for a clothing company to do something like that, because so much of it it's design oriented, and that is difficult. You can hire designers, but like I'm still directing the direction of the business, and so that makes it a little bit more challenging. But that's kind of like what we're going through right now, and I'm super excited. I feel like it's probably the most excited I've been about my business in a long time, because I am a person that absolutely craves like knowledge. I love learning. I love talking. I love talking about business. It's probably one of my favorite topics. Sometimes I feel like I frighten people by how much I like to talk about it.
I feel like you and I could just talk for like 5 hours.
It's just so
keep
fun.
Talking.
It's so interesting. I mean, I love everything.
Same.
I love real estate. Like I own 3 houses. We Airbnb stuff. Like I just love all this stuff. I love.
Sounds like I'm going to be like just talking to you more, honestly.
Whenever you
Taylor,
want.
what do you like? What's going on in your world? Because we're like very like similar.
It's fun, and I mean, I literally have read like tax law books. Like I just am really into this stuff. And the biggest challenge for me in being an entrepreneur has been the lack of, I'm learning all the time. I'm learning from my experiences. I'm having to be self-taught. I miss having somebody above me teach me how to do it better. And instead I have I think we've done a pretty good job. Like I feel like even people that we're bringing in, I'm showing them what we're doing. They're like, oh, actually like this is pretty like, you're actually doing a pretty good job of like how you've set up things and how you think about things in the business. But I am craving learning, like craving it. And so I'm really hoping to bring on, some candidates that I'm talking to right now are like just so unbelievably experienced, so much more experienced than I am, like so badass. And I want to bring them on. If nothing more, it's like me going to business school and like learning again and seeing how it's done properly. Because I can keep like running around in circles and I can probably figure it out, but it's probably going to take me like 4 times as long. And I think business is all about timing too. That's something that I think maybe gets talked about or doesn't get talked about enough. Like you do have to have some timing where there is a little bit of luck to that, of people timing things well.
Absolutely. And I think there's, going back to what I said way early in the pod, but there's like moments in time and moments in your life, but then also like in a business time to be like, okay, and it sounds like you're kind of in that one of those like pivotal times where like, I want to capture, we're in the time and I want to capture our opportunity, and that will like boost us into the stratosphere.
Yes.
So there are times where, and I love what you said, like, hey, maybe over the last 8 or so years, it's been a little bit less, maybe on the stores have been more risky, and on the brands kind of been like, it's been cruising, but now I need to like take more risk. And you're in that kind of pivotal moment right now, and need a partner to kind of see a COO partner to like do that with and help you take these risks and to get to the next reward.
And not miss the opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I look at it a lot. Like I know if I didn't take this risk, and hiring a COO at the level that we're looking to hire, they're not inexpensive. Like it's a very big, it is a risk. But I look at it like I've always looked. I feel like I've actually going through this process. I've had, friends, just people give opinions along the way, and it's like, oh well, why do you have to hire that person? Why do you not just hire somebody just out of business school that's like half as expensive, a third as expensive, whatever. And to me, I'm like, well, I'm hiring somebody. I like, I don't know what I'm doing. You get what you pay for. And I'm hiring somebody that like just is so knowledgeable and can, I know, take us, not hiring somebody that like, I'm still going to have to kind of like handhold. And I feel like for me taking this risk, I'm really hopeful we'll have a very large reward. And if I don't take the risk, like at the end of the day, the worst that's going to happen is that we make less money this year, you know, and we can get out and I'll go back to what I'm doing. And we just keep slowly growing.
And you learned what worked
exactly.
with that person. Like I said, you win or you learn, and then you learned what worked with that person. And then you're like, okay, I need to find something a little bit different. But these things worked, so I just need to retool on who I need to bring in. And maybe if it doesn't work the first time, maybe the next time.
Yeah, maybe it's somebody else.
Yeah, if it didn't work, yeah.
But I look at it like if I don't take the risk and pay now, I am losing the opportunity to make so much more later. And it's really just like a long game for me. And I feel like, yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. We're trying to take that risk right now.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited, and I feel blessed because I think I brought this up a little bit earlier, but one of the gentlemen I've been speaking to about this role, he was we were talking about like raising money, which is like a whole nother thing I feel like talk about in terms of like risk, you know, raising money. So obviously, like I said, we never raised any money. And I said, I was like, do you feel like I really don't, at this point in my career, I don't want to raise money. I don't feel like, 12 years of the business, I feel like we ideally wouldn't have to, because you give up a lot of control when you raise money. I think having a board is very different, but like actually like raising money, it changes a lot of the things. And the pieces that I value about being an entrepreneur, which is the flexibility, the pivotability, the freedom, all that stuff. But I was like, do you feel like we need to raise it to be able to hit these marks that we want to hit? And he said no, which I was really grateful for, because this is where it all like comes back to like you do things, I did everything backwards. He's like, you have this custom business that is essentially working as your investment capital, because it's like a very lean, consistent, it's kind of like this nest egg, this just constant. And it's kind of like a bank account. It's like a revolving line of credit, because you have it growing over here, and like I can afford for us to grow our direct-to-consumer business and maybe like not make any money.
Yeah.
Maybe not, maybe be flat, or maybe lose money. It's okay, like for a year or two, because we have this over here. And so it's all kind of like, worked out the way that hopefully it's supposed to work out. And so, yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at right now. That is the journey.
I love it.
Yeah.
So I got to ask, because I'm an insurance guy, obviously. And, are you like utilizing insurance for your businesses? Obviously, I know we were talking a little bit about that before we hopped online, but like, what does that look like? Any advice to people? Can you kind of break that down for us a little bit of what you know? Obviously, you're like running the show and all these businesses, but like, how's that? How are you using insurance to mitigate your risk a bit? Yeah,
so we have insurance. I mean, when you work in retail, it's required to have insurance. Like the landlord requires you to have insurance. So all of my businesses have commercial insurance, liability. We have unemployment insurance. Is that withholding? Is it withholding or unemployment? I always get confused.
Well, you have probably workers' compensation.
Workers' comp, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
So we have that, which, certainly I feel like there's things that you can't avoid. Like those are obviously things that we can't avoid. But we've utilized them. I've called in, we've had problems with theft. We've utilized an insurance policy and called it in when we had like a lot of theft at one point in the store. So, anyway, different story for another time. But like we had all this stuff stolen at one point. Like we've done that. We've had damages from, this is more like my clothing company. We have liability insurance and all of that. But really the stores, think about it like your house. Like how often are things going wrong? They're going wrong in a retail store just as much as they're going wrong in your house. I mean, talking about my Charleston store, we actually used to think it was cursed. We staged it. We would do we were like, this place, there is something effed up with this place.
It is beautiful, but there is something messed up.
No, I mean, like one time, this is crazy. We had these windows on the second floor, 20-foot high windows. They were They were like probably 10 feet wide. It was this huge window, beautiful. The whole thing was windows. One day I get like a text from one of our girls being like, hey, the window looks like a little weird. Like it's kind of like leaning in. I'm like, what do you mean it's like leaning in? And I text our landlord and I'm like, hey, there's something up with the window. Could you like come by like immediately? Whatever. Fast forward like 20 minutes. We have it on video. It was insane. And we have tons of people in the store. So the entire window, the 18-foot high window, just falls, slow motion, all the way into the store, shatters, glass just everywhere. It
my God.
It was insane. And that's something like we weren't responsible for that because like usually the landlord's responsible for the exterior. But I think about that all the time because of luckily nobody got hurt. But there were like 20 people upstairs, and that area that I was in was kind of like not being utilized, thank God. Or if it had fallen the other way onto the street. And I mean,
there's
obviously,
a person underneath
oh
there.
my God, like we could have killed. I don't want to say we, it wasn't like our fault. Basically what happened is the window rotted out. But we could have killed people from that window falling in. And,
totally.
And those are the reasons why you have insurance. And there's just been a lot of like little things I feel like I'm trying to think. We've never had anybody sue us. Oh my God, knock on wood.
Knock on wood.
Yeah,
it's not an if, it's just a when.
Yeah, I think,
you know.
Yeah, sorry. I have been personally sued, but I haven't had anyone sue us for like tripping over anything or something like that.
It will happen though.
Yeah, no, it does. And you have to protect yourself. There's so many things that can go wrong. And workers' comp. Oh my God, like what if one of those employees had been hurt when cleaning up that, or it had fallen? Like just so many pieces that go into employing people and having something being public to everybody else. My clothing company, Ellsworth, like we don't have an office. It's a little bit more lean. We still have to have all these policies, but they're just a little different. And then like speaking to what we spoke about before, having 3 stores in a hurricane path is a very interesting. I had one hurricane. God, I can't remember which hurricane it was. Maybe Irma. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We had one hurricane hit every single one of my stores. The same one. It was just like the most painful week and a half. And what we were chatting about before is that so I have a store in Florida, and my store in Nantucket is on it's on the water. So prior to the Fort Myers hurricane that like decimated Fort Myers I think it was like 2 years ago, I could still get some sort of insurance, but like I can't get flood insurance in Palm Beach, nor can I get it on Nantucket because I'm in flood zones. And that's extremely problematic. So like every time there's a hurricane, we go through the same process. It's like you sandbag, you lift everything up, you do as much as you can. And it would be, I've been lucky that it hasn't happened to me yet, but it's like one of those things like, especially like Florida, like it's coming for us. We got really lucky a few times. We're like narrowly missed, but it's scary. And right now, actually just going to Nantucket for like, I'm very fortunate because our store there, even though it's in a flood zone, it's like really, really high. So like everything always floods around us except our store. But like I know one of the other friends that has a shop there, one year he had, I don't even know how this, I'm sure he uses insurance policy for this. He had gotten all of his new merchandise. It was right before we were about to open in like April or May. He had all his merchandise on the floor. The entire store flooded. It was like 4 feet of water. Oh, I think he said it was like $300,000 of merchandise ruined. And he that is why you have these policies to protect you if that is the case. And, they're not cheap, but it's a lot cheaper than having to replace $300,000 of merchandise.
Absolutely.
It's really important.
You have to transfer that risk. I mean, especially in the areas that you're in. Mm-hmm. I mean, oh my God. Yeah. It's the risk that you run if you don't have that is just, it's incredible. I mean, you'd be surprised. There are companies that just run like, we're just going to see what happens because they don't want to pay the expense or whatever, or they can't. But no, I mean, it has to be baked into your cost. You have to, yeah, you have to have it. It's especially where you are. Oh my gosh.
It's interesting. So for my clothing company, and this wasn't something that happened up until recently, but we have been signing some larger clients, and they require that we put them on our policy, which I think it's because technically, like we signed, we're selling on the PGA Tour now, which is the PGA Tour is like a bunch of different tournaments. And because there's like people in person, I think, selling it. Because I kind of was trying to figure out why they even wanted it. But like we're also selling in airports now. And they all are requiring that we have these policies.
It basically would be like if one of your employees came on site and then caused damage then they're suing like another, like say an employee comes on site, they're setting up the pop-up like falls down or something like that. Hurts one of their workers, and then the worker's like trying to sue them, but it's really your liability. So they want to be listed on that. Someone's like, I don't know. There's a lot of different situations, but like some fabric that you use, someone's like deathly allergic to it, and then the family's trying to like sue the PGA because they're selling this certain thing, like things like that. It seems that sounds like random, but it's not. Like stuff like that happens all the time, and it's. So that's why they typically,
that makes sense.
As a vendor, and you should do the same on certain like
with accounts
for your shops. Like, if it's a big enough like account in certain things, you should do the same. More of like, hey, you're selling in our shop, so I need to make sure you have insurance. So if I get sued, but it's you're liable, I know you have insurance that's going to pick us up as well because we're just selling your goods,
Yeah.
So things like that. We could talk about that, another time, but it's certainly something to think about if you have like a big enough account at one of your physical locations. But it's very common. A lot of small businesses grow into their insurance just through contract requirements.
Exactly. Yeah. That's kind of, I think, how we honestly ended up originally. Like when I would do certain trunk shows in the beginning for Ellsworth, they were all like us on-site places, and we almost all the time we'd constantly have to have policies for that, and so that's kind of like how it began.
Yeah.
But it is really important. Like I feel like if the pandemic didn't teach us anything, like you might like obviously we didn't have insurance for the pandemic, but like everything can be going great, and then all of a sudden it's not. And the more you can mitigate that risk. Everybody wanted to have pandemic insurance then. And at the time,
Totally.
I feel like it was probably really expensive. It honestly wasn't even something I really thought about, but like it was probably so expensive. But how many businesses wouldn't have not gone under if they had it and they had just been paying into it the whole time?
Yeah.
So it's insurance is a big, and then obviously if you have employees, you need the workers' comp. And that's like a whole nother thing. And I'm trying to think what other insurance
Any other like I'm curious because there is like the obviously actual insurance policies, right? Which you kind of got into. There's like property liability, workers' comp. Do you guys carry any like EPLI insurance? That's like sexual harassment lawsuits between employees or anything like that? Or
no, but maybe we should.
If you have employees, it's definitely like it's the number one claim in California. So
is it?
Yeah, I mean it's maybe a little less. Depends on your state how like employee friendly they are, but maybe in Florida. Florida's probably a lot more employer friendly, but still a risk, and there still could be lawyer fees that you have to pay out on that and stuff. So
I'm trying to think.
Something definitely worth exploring. But I was curious. Like there also are like operational like procedures and insurances. Anything that like comes to mind in your businesses that you'd want to share with listeners of like, hey, we've set this up and it's been really great for us, and it is kind of a risk mitigation strategy on the front end for like operationally in our business, things like that. Because in a sense, that is an insurance. You're kind of like steps or we transfer risk really well by doing these things operationally.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Okay, so I mean. This is, I guess, related, but like going to trade shows for us is probably like we pre-sell inventory. And that's been like the best way that we can also going back to like Robbie with the trying to figure out like, I don't think they really wholesale yet. And wholesale, I feel like a lot of brands try to, I can understand why you want to start with D2C. I think it's difficult. Well, it's really difficult right now because the landscape's really polluted. And like the cost of acquiring a new client is really high right now. So that's challenging. But wholesale to me is its own insurance policy. So when you make stuff, a lot of times you have to hit certain minimums. And we go to these trade shows, and they're not like necessarily inexpensive, but we pre-sell what we've made. So we know when we go to a show, we get orders, and those are essentially guaranteed orders. This is like different than my custom business, because my custom businesses has very little risk. But like if we're talking about like when I make a collection that I'm not making custom, yeah, we're pre-selling orders, and then we have like this whole system, like an order, we call it order analysis. We'll go through, we'll collect the orders until there's a cutoff date for when we have to actually submit the order to the factory to be able to produce in time for the delivery window. And we'll go through and we'll look at how many orders we got. And I look at the size breakdown data of like what's being ordered and how people are buying it. And then we don't have a lot of data I think data is the most risk mitigating that you can do, but unfortunately it just takes time to build it. But we essentially look at what we've sold, and then we take a calculated, based on trying as much as we can based on data, like, okay, this is how much we actually sold last year between the window of order placement and delivery to wholesale. And this is how much we sold online. And then we're taking all that information and then we're purchasing. I think going back to risk mitigation of, I feel like my retail store is like almost the best example of it's so risky with inventory. It's, I think, way riskier than even, maybe not way, maybe equally risky. So we've had 2 instances where we've done overbuys. I had both of the times were outsourced overbuys where I had brought in external people to do the buys. And ultimately, like as the business owner, it's my fault. Like it's my job to be overseeing everything. And I feel like I took my eye off the ball and I didn't see it in time for a lot of different reasons. But it was the thing that you want. Like the Skinny Dips had some moments. But we had this is 2022, $500,000 overbuy. Can you like even? It's like outrageous.
Wow.
From a consultant, and the reason why it happened is like, it doesn't really matter. But she basically bought as if we didn't have some. She bought. It's too complicated to kind of understand without knowing more about my business. But she made a mistake looking at the data wrong. Basically, is what I would say. And so I get stuck with that. Talking about like panic, like that's like the ultimate thing that you don't want at a retail store, because that is what makes people go under. And so I figured this out. I was able to cancel and like beg forgiveness for, I probably got rid of 200,000 of it, but we still had a $300,000 overbuy, which is a lot. Luckily our stores did well that year. We had some online, and then we just had to like sell stuff on sale. Like we had to just sell it. And that is really hard. Now, what I learned from that is like, first of all, like I feel like that's one piece I don't know that quite yet I'm able to like outsource. That was a lesson there. But we buy very differently now. I buy risk aversely. Like I'm always thinking about, and I don't know if all retail stores do this. They should, but I feel like even I have an assistant buyer who was telling me that at our old job, they would, when you buy for a retail store, you go into like a buying season with something called an open to buy. So you basically, it's a budget for how much you should be spending. And she was saying, she's like, oh, well, at my old job, we would spend the whole open to buy so that we didn't have to do like reorders. I am like so opposite. Right now for my Nantucket store, we're $150,000 underbought for the season. And like, I would so much rather chase inventory, but I'm looking at it like, okay, the economy is really weird right now. Like businesses are down. I'm in an unfortunate position where I'm like, my clothing company is like crazy up, and most businesses, especially in retail, are not doing well, down at least 20, maybe even 30%. So I'm looking at my buys accordingly. Like this is an election year. Like everything is messy right now with the economy and everything. And we might be in these markets that like, another piece of the risk mitigation is I think like, again, for the retail store, I guess you could also think about this in like the industry that you're in. Like everyone always needs insurance. That's like you're risk mitigating by going into an industry that is a necessity.
Absolutely.
Necessity.
Literally, that's why I'm in the industry. I mean, we talk about it. It's like you literally have to have it.
There's like always needs for nurses, like stuff like that.
Yeah, there's like literally a legal requirement, and that's literally like the single thing of why I got into this industry.
It's super smart.
It's a lot of things have grown from that, and I appreciate being in the industry. But yeah, no, to your point, it's like there's a bit of risk mitigation there. There's job loss mitigation, because you're always gonna have a job in here. But
I mean, I commend you. Like I'm in probably the worst industry for that. Like that and hospitality, are things first to go when budgets get tight. Like you stop buying clothes, you stop eating out, and so to combat that, I definitely have positioned ourselves strategically in markets that are less risk averse to that. Like Nantucket is one of the highest fluctuating, it's a very, very, very wealthy island. And in order to go there, you have to be very wealthy. It's gotten really actually almost outrageous over the last few years. And in order to afford a vacation there, you have to be at a certain, financial status. And while that's not necessarily that is probably a problem in its own. For me, I know that I'm in at least I am giving my store its best shot ever because you're constantly having people travel there that have money to spend.
Absolutely,
and they're not as affected by an economy going down. Palm Beach, is the same thing. Charleston for me was what I found very vulnerable because it didn't have yes, there's obviously affluent people in Charleston, but it wasn't a bubble of wealth. And everyone's always like, oh, you're going to open up. Oh, well, I'm definitely not opening up any more retail stores. I wouldn't suggest somebody open up retail stores. It's just kind of been my path. And I've learned a lot about along the way. But I think that I have been able to kind of, if you're going to do it in the least risky way. And so I don't want to open any more stores unless I found some other special market like in Nantucket, and I haven't found that. Where also our overhead is actually not that high there, which is really good. So it's just a great retail market. But I feel like that's kind of what we've done in terms of risk mitigation. If that was to answer your question, I can't.
No, for sure.
Other operational things, I guess, like processes that we use and checks and balances and things like that. But
yeah. So that definitely answered my questions. I mean, I think that's an amazing strategy in itself. Like you said, the kind of wealth bubble is a kind of risk mitigation strategy in itself to make sure that your business stays viable. And at the end of the day, it's just real world. That's real world thinking. That's what I'm trying to have people who are listening to this understand. And it's hey, maybe some people think that, I don't even know how you can think it's oh, what the heck, you're in Nantucket. But it's isn't that where everyone wants to be? That you have this ever evolve, driving business that you're just I specifically set myself up there because I knew it was gonna, risk mitigate myself and it was be consistent. And so I think kudos to you. But I also think it's really great for people to learn. And that's what we're trying to learn here is how you think about that as an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. So
I think there's I feel like it's almost not PC for me to be I chose an extremely wealthy market to go in. And to me,
I think there's nothing wrong with that.
No, there isn't.
Why would you not? You're a retail store. It's also, that's what you want, where you want to be.
You can't be, I think what I've learned, and there's such a push to be extra inclusive. That's just what the world, is pushing right now as a business. And I love it. It bothers me in the sense that it's so easy for someone on the outside to say, oh, you need to be inclusive. You need to be making something, but without any idea the costs and the financial burden to actually be that way. Most businesses do not do well, or they go out of business when they are trying to be something for everybody. And it's it's just, it's so
that is
easy for them.
That is a luxury belief.
100%.
That is someone coming from a place of cush or to say, oh, you should be doing this. It's, yeah, that's okay, because maybe you're saying that because you have family money and you don't have to think about these things. Oh yeah, it's great, whatever. I'm not judging, but it's just like, that is such a luxury belief.
100%.
It's not a, this is how the world works belief.
Yeah. And once people start to understand that, I'm shocked with how, especially in the last few years, that's obviously been like a hot topic. And it's like just one quick sideline story. And during the pandemic, we were doing photo shoots on Nantucket, and we didn't have any money for models, and we were just like, it was just our staff, and we started to get comments on our Instagram that we weren't being inclusive with body types, with color, with everything like that. And I wanted to, and now we do that because we have the money to do that. But I was so frustrated, and it made me really upset, because I'm like, you know what? Like, F you guys, you have no idea. The reason we're doing this, I am literally trying to survive right now. And this is the only option I have, because they're free and they're right here. And it's so easy for you to be like, you should pay to have all these people. Like, what money? Like, what world are you living in? And how do you know what's going on in my life and why we're making these decisions? It's not, it's out of necessity. It's not purposely trying to like hurt somebody. And it's just so, it's just a sensitive topic for me.
Yeah. No,
it's hard.
I get it. It's because, most people, they don't do entrepreneurship. They don't.
Yeah, well, they live in this bubble.
Yeah, they're very risk averse, and they're maybe life is, I don't know, I'm going to say stable, but they're coming from a place of, so a lot of times it's maybe insecurity. They feel like I want to do this or whatever. And then people, as how people do, right? They project out their maybe
Always.
Insecurities or back to what I said, kind of a luxury belief of like, you're in the position to say that, but because you have X, Y, and Z situation. And so everybody's situation is different. I think we're all human. We're all in the same, I want to say struggle, but same journey. Everyone's trying to find meaning and trying to belong and like do their best. I really think people are good and have good hearts and are driven and, want to make the best of their situation in the world. And so, you just gotta support rather than trying to tear down like
Always,
that.
Yeah.
It's great. Rather, you never hear the, oh my gosh, you guys are killing it, and I can't believe you created this. But it's always negative. It's always negative. So
and social media has allowed that to happen, or made it a little easier.
Yeah.
Still a lot of good that's come out of it, for being able to start a business from just having an Instagram page. But it's like, I don't know, might have tipped the other way at this point.
Yeah.
In terms of bad.
We'll see. So to kind of put a bow on it, like and you've talked, first of all, it's been an amazing conversation. And you've talked a bit about, where you want to take Ellsworth and Ivey. Anything like into the future, other things, you touched on, hey, maybe the stores are kind of just going to kind of run their own thing. Is there anything else you're kind of looking at into the future? Where are you going from here? What are you excited about? And how are you thinking about, again, I appreciate you talking a lot about Ellsworth, Ivey, how you're thinking about into the future, the risks I need to take. But anything else? Any other ventures with your 5 businesses?
Yeah. Well, I think after the pandemic, I realized, and maybe like it was important that I didn't put all my eggs in one basket. That's something for me that really came out of just diversifying. And then there's the lesson of like, obviously I'm trying to learn how to like diversify and remove myself so I can continue to diversify. But I have like a obsession with real estate. Like really, really fascinated with it. It's obviously a difficult time for real estate right now.
Maybe started with the Airbnbs and now it's come full circle to you have your own Airbnbs. Yes. I thought of that right when you said that because I know you guys own Airbnbs.
It was funny when when we launched our Airbnb or our first one, I already had an Airbnb profile where I had 170 reviews.
Wow.
I was already a super host. It's hilarious.
That's awesome.
So it was just like super easy.
We just got our first one as well.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, we have it in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Oh, I feel like I saw that. It's like fun. It can be great. I feel like it's all,
creative in the whole thing. Yeah.
Diversifying like cash flow, is really important to me right now. And trying to set up, I think currently my goal and how I look at the future is like, how can I continue to set up passive income streams? Because ultimately, like, I've loved this journey. Admittingly, I'm a little tired. 12 years, it hasn't been, it's been a grind from the ups and downs. I'm kind of looking at like when I start to have children in the next few years, hopefully, like that I'll take a little bit of time off. And so if that's where I want to go, and obviously my goal for Ellsworth and Ivey is like a 5 to 10 year plan at this point. But how can I set myself up at the business to be not working 80 hours a week? And how can I continue to diversify my assets to have more little passive income streams like our Airbnbs? Like, I guess that's kind of all I have. I mean, I'm always looking at new opportunities for that. There's so many fascinating ways to make money right now. Even using like a lot of AI stuff, really fascinating. I just hired this consultant to come in and help us set up, automate a lot of our processes because we're a little manual right now. And I've always been like pretty good at like techie things. This I'm okay at, but I'm so excited. Like normally when I hire a consultant, I'm not like shadowing him like constantly. This one I am like literally breathing over his neck, being like, how did you do this? And watching him figure out how to, automate our business and trigger everything so it's all happening automatically. And I keep looking at that and how I can take that into my real estate businesses, how I can take that and build a new business as a side hustle, how I can take that with Seth's business and music. Like, it's so fascinating. Like, I have a lot of thoughts on AI, and I think some are good and some are bad, but I'm a big proponent, and I keep telling my staff this and my girls, I'm like, just like, I know you're not using it right now, like, grab hold to it. Like, this is the moment. This is like, to me, this is like the computer. Like, if you didn't adapt, you got left behind. And I feel like that with AI, like, jump on this and learn how to use it to your advantage before it surpasses you and you get stuck left behind. That's not necessarily answer to your question, but that's kind of like where I'm looking at revenue streams of how I could build more passive income so that when and if I do exit from Ellsworth and Ivey, which definitely is my plan, hopefully 5 years, that I still have revenue coming in on a consistent basis versus like, if I were to get bought out and have like one lump sum, like I'm always thinking about like if I were to actually get a lump sum, like what would I do with it? But I'm really, really hyper fascinated with health and wellness, and like biohacking and skincare and all that stuff. I think coming from when I started, I've always been interested in it, but when I got the nerve damage and it really like shook my life up, I got really interested in all of that. And that's where I'd like to spend like the rest of my life is in the wellness industry, which I know is a hot industry, but I just absolutely love it. So just try to kind of like learn on the side and try to live that life. And I think, I don't know what will end up happening. I'm open to things. Wouldn't mind like not working 80 hours a week though for the rest of my life.
Yeah, you'll get there.
That's the dream.
You'll get there.
That's the dream, yeah.
Yeah, no, we're so similar in that way. It's like just a lot of like fascinations and fascinating with like learning and yeah, it's there's so many possibilities, so many things in the world. It's
really
amazing.
exciting. I think, I don't know if you're like this, like how I am. It can be almost, it's a wonderful trait, but it's also like, it's like ADD a little bit. Like,
yeah, for sure.
Like
you have to border yourself. You have to be like, I have to just focus on these things.
Mm-hmm. I've been really trying to do that. We almost bought a wedding venue just somewhat recently.
Wow.
Seth and I, like we went really, I mean, like I built out 10-year projections of financials. Like I was like really in this. And then I was like, I can't do this. Like if I do this, it will be, I am sacrificing something else and I can't. And so I'm trying to stay hyper-focused. And I think that's a problem with entrepreneurs. And, you're sacrificing, maybe you have all these other great ideas, but you just got to stay on one.
Yeah, for sure.
As much as you don't want to.
You're a dog on a bone. You're just, I jive with that for sure. Where
exactly.
I get super excited about different things. And, but yeah, you gotta learn to kind of just focus in and, so, cool. Well, I think we'll kind of wrap the conversation there. Where can people find you?
Oh,
in all your businesses.
Yeah. I mean, the Skinny Dip has just one Instagram, which is good. So I think it's Skinny Dip. I should know this. It's the Skinny Dip Collective. And we sell online at shopthedip.com. And then Ellsworth and Ivey is just Ellsworth and Ivey. And then my other clothing company, Moncoko, has a website, but it's really only sold through other retailers. And I strategically only cut to sew it. Cut to sew? Yeah, that's what it's called. We're basically I only actually make enough inventory based on how many orders I get, which is a risk mitigation there. Yeah. I didn't want it to be a D2C business. It's basically an in-house brand for my stores. And when we sell out, and I just call it a day, and then we just keep remaking the same silhouettes every year and change the print. It's probably the most risk-averse clothing company you can have in that sense, where we just tried to keep it really streamlined.
Simple. Streamlined.
So that's kind of, that's where they all kind of have their own Instagrams, but it's mostly just the two.
And yourself, Taylor Ivey.
Oh, Taylor Ivey. Well, I'm super active on Instagram. Not just joking. I mean, I have a private Instagram, but Taylor Ivey, Taylor S. Ivey.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten into the the influencer life yet. I don't know if that's for me. There's a lot of benefits with it though. I love sharing stories, and if I want to get into health and wellness, I know that's kind of a path you kind of have to do. We'll see. Maybe someday.
Yeah. I think you have the personality to do it, but if you wanted to. It sounds like you can do anything you put your mind to. So
I try to live every day in that mentality, even if it's not true, because it's the fake it till you make it thing. You got to at least tell yourself that. If you don't believe that, then you're screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you so much. This was fun.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you for coming on the show. Taylor Ivey, folks. We'll talk to you soon. Hey guys, so if you like this content, make sure to check out my next podcast, which you can do so by clicking the little box right here on the screen. Should be a box right here on the screen. Just click it. It'll take you to the next podcast. Look forward to seeing you guys there. Now let's get into it.